They said Rowan Hale was carved from stone in silence, untouchable, unmovable, a man who ruled Blackridge Valley with an iron grip and a frozen heart. But tonight, as the crystal shattered against marble and Lena Ashford's voice cut through the ballroom like a blade, the entire valley would see him bleed. She stood before him in diamonds and fury. The orphan girl he'd raised, abandoned, and nearly destroyed, now seconds from wedding another man. A man whose smile hid daggers. And Rowan? He'd finally run out of excuses. Stay until the end to see how love survives what silence destroys. Drop a comment with your city. We want to know who's watching from where. Hit that like button if you believe in second chances fought for, not given. The day Thomas Ashford died, the rain fell like judgment over Blackridge Valley. Rowan Hale stood at the edge of the mudslide, 22 years old and already inheriting more weight than most men carry in a lifetime. His father's chief surveyor lay somewhere beneath tons of rock and earth, and beside Rowan, clutching his arm with white-knuckled desperation, stood a girl of 12 with eyes that had just learned what it meant to be utterly alone. "Papa?" Lena whispered, the word barely audible over the drumming rain. "Papa's down there?" Rowan didn't answer immediately. He couldn't. His throat felt packed with gravel, his chest tight with a responsibility he hadn't asked for, but couldn't refuse. Thomas Ashford had been more than an employee. He'd been the man who taught Rowan how to read land, how to see potential where others saw only wilderness. And now he was gone, crushed while surveying the northern expansion that would triple the Hale holdings. "Yes," Rowan finally said, his voice rougher than he intended. "I'm sorry, Lena." She didn't cry. Not then. She simply stood there, rain plastering dark hair to her pale face, her thin dress soaked through, trembling not from cold but from the seismic shift of her entire world crumbling beneath her feet. Rowan recognized that particular species of shock. He'd worn it himself 6 months earlier when his own father had succumbed to fever, leaving him the valley, the legacy, and 1,000 unspoken expectations. "What happens to me now?" Lena asked, and the pragmatism in her voice, that immediate leap to survival rather than grief, told Rowan everything he needed to know about Thomas Ashford's daughter. She was built for hard country, even if she didn't know it yet. "You come with me," Rowan said, and it wasn't a question or an offer. It was a decree. "Blackridge Hall. You'll have a room, an education, everything you need." "Charity?" The word came sharp, defensive. "Family," Rowan corrected, meeting her eyes directly for the first time. "Your father gave his life expanding Hale land. That makes you Hale responsibility. That makes you mine." Something flickered across Lena's face then. Relief, perhaps, or the faint ember of hope trying desperately not to ignite in case it was snuffed out just as quickly. She nodded once, a small, solemn dip of her chin that seemed far too mature for 12 years old. That was how Lena Ashford came to Blackridge Hall. Not as a guest or a ward, but as something undefined, too close to be a servant, too distant to be true family, suspended in that uncertain space that would define their relationship for years to come. 3 years later. "You're overthinking it," Rowan said, guiding his stallion alongside Lena's mare as they crested the ridge overlooking the eastern pastures. "Don't anticipate the jump. Feel it. Let the horse tell you when." Lena shot him a look that was half frustration, half determination. At 15, she'd grown tall and lean, all angles and intensity, her dark hair usually pulled back in a practical braid that inevitably came loose during their rides. She'd taken to the valley like she was born to it, learning the land, the livestock, the brutal economics of frontier agriculture with a hunger that surprised even Rowan. "Easy for you to say," she muttered, adjusting her grip on the reins. "You were riding before you could walk. And you've been riding for 3 years and can already outpace half my ranch hands. Stop selling yourself short." They rode in companionable silence for a while, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the valley floor. This had become their ritual. 2 or 3 times a week, Rowan would drag Lena away from her books or her work in the estate office, and they'd ride the borders, checking fences, surveying expansion sites, talking through problems both immediate and philosophical. It was the only time Rowan felt truly at ease. The valley sprawled around them in all its harsh beauty, rolling grasslands giving way to pine forests, mountains rising like sentinels in the distance, creeks cutting silver threads through the earth. This was his kingdom, his burden, his purpose. And beside him rode the one person who seemed to understand that particular cocktail of pride and pressure. "The McGregor property," Lena said suddenly. "You're still considering the purchase?" Rowan nodded. "It's good land. Water rights alone make it worth the price." "But?" He glanced at her, impressed as always by her ability to hear what he wasn't saying. "But Malcolm McGregor's a stubborn bastard who'd rather see his ranch rot than sell to a Hale. Family grudge going back 2 generations." "What if you didn't approach him directly?" Lena's eyes had that particular gleam they got when she was working through a problem. "What if you had someone else make the initial offer? Someone he doesn't associate with Hale business?" "Like who?" "Like me." Rowan pulled his horse to a stop, studying her with new attention. "You." "I'm Thomas Ashford's daughter," Lena said, meeting his gaze with absolute confidence. "McGregor knew my father, respected him. I could approach it as wanting to purchase a small parcel for sentimental reasons. Land where Papa used to survey. Get him talking, build rapport, then mention casually that I might know a buyer interested in the whole property if he ever considered selling. It was clever, manipulative, yes, but in the way that all successful negotiation required manipulation, understanding psychology, playing to ego, finding the path of least resistance to get what you wanted." "You've been paying attention," Rowan said finally, and allowed himself a rare smile. Lena's answering grin was fierce and bright. "I have an excellent teacher." That evening, back at Blackridge Hall, Rowan found himself watching Lena across the dinner table with something approaching wonder. When had the frightened 12-year-old transformed into this sharp, confident young woman? When had her presence become so essential to his daily routine that he structured his entire schedule around their rides, their conversations, their collaborative problem-solving? "You're staring," Lena said without looking up from her plate. "Thinking," Rowan corrected. "About?" "About how much you've grown, how much you've learned." Now she did look up, and something in her expression made Rowan's chest tighten inexplicably. "I had good motivation," she said quietly. "You gave me a home when I had nothing, a purpose. I don't intend to waste it." "You could never waste anything," Rowan said, and meant it with an intensity that surprised even himself. The moment stretched between them, weighted with something Rowan couldn't quite name. Then Mrs. Brennan, the housekeeper, swept in with dessert, and the spell broke. But Rowan couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted, like tectonic plates grinding against each other deep beneath the surface, imperceptible but inevitable. 2 years later, the day. Everything change started like any other. Rowan was in the estate office, wrestling with quarterly accounts and a dispute with the railroad company over shipping rates when Lena burst through the door with her usual lack of ceremony. "I got it," she announced, breathless and triumphant, waving a document above her head. McGregor signed. "We have the water rights." Rowan rose from his desk, genuine surprise breaking through his carefully maintained composure. "He agreed to the full purchase?" "Not just agreed, he practically insisted. Turns out his daughter wants to move to San Francisco, and he's tired of fighting the land alone. He asked me to convey his thanks to you for giving Thomas Ashford's girl the tools to make her own way." Lena's smile could have lit the entire valley. "We did it, Rowan. The valley's unified. No more patchwork ownership, no more competing claims. Blackridge is whole." She was radiant in her victory. 17 years old, flushed with success, her eyes bright with the particular joy that came from solving an impossible problem. Rowan moved around the desk, intending to congratulate her properly, to acknowledge the skill and patience she'd shown in cultivating McGregor's trust over 2 years of careful relationship building. But when he reached her, when he took the document from her hands and their fingers brushed, something happened. Rowan saw her. Not Lena the ward, or Lena the protege, or even Lena the business partner. He saw Lena the woman, standing close enough that he could smell the faint scent of sage and summer grass on her skin, near enough that he could see the individual lashes framing those sharp, intelligent eyes. He noticed the curve of her mouth, the elegant line of her throat, the way her riding jacket fit across shoulders that had grown strong from years of hard country living. And in that moment, Rowan felt desire slam into him like a physical blow. It was wrong. Completely, fundamentally wrong. She was his ward, his responsibility, practically his sister in every way that mattered. He'd raised her, taught her, shaped her into who she was today. To want her, to see her as anything other than the girl he'd sworn to protect, it violated every code Rowan lived by. "Rowan?" Lena's voice carried concern. "Are you all right? You look strange." He stepped back as though burned, putting crucial distance between them. "Fine. Excellent work on the McGregor deal. You should be proud." "We should celebrate," Lena said, and the warmth in her voice, the unconscious intimacy of that "we," made Rowan's resolve harden into something close to panic. "I have work," he said curtly, retreating behind his desk like it was a fortress wall. "You can take the rest of the day. Enjoy your victory." Confusion flickered across Lena's face. "I thought we could ride out to the North Ridge, look at the new property together." "No." The word came out harsher than he intended, and Rowan watched Lena flinch as though he'd struck her. "I'm busy, Lena. I don't have time for recreational rides." The light died in her eyes. Just like that, the joy extinguished, replaced by hurt and bewilderment. "Oh, of course, I'll leave you to it then. I'll leave." She turned and walked out, her posture still proud but somehow diminished, and Rowan felt like the worst kind of bastard. But what choice did he have? He couldn't allow this attraction to develop, couldn't permit himself to see her as anything other than his ward. The power imbalance alone made any romantic consideration unconscionable. So Rowan did what he did best. He controlled the situation through distance and discipline. He stopped their rides, stopped their long conversations, stopped seeking her opinion on business matters. He erected walls of ice and silence between them, hoping that separation would kill whatever inappropriate feelings had taken root in his chest. It worked, in a way. The attraction didn't disappear. Rowan found himself achingly aware of Lena's presence whenever she entered a room, noticed every detail of her growth from girl to woman with an attention that bordered on obsession. But he kept his distance, remained coldly professional, treated her with the formal courtesy he'd extend to any household member, no more and no less. What Rowan didn't anticipate was how completely his withdrawal would devastate Lena. 4 years later. At 21, Lena Ashford had learned to carry her loneliness like a second skin, invisible to others, ever present to herself. She sat in the estate office, reviewing procurement contracts for the winter stores, her pen moving with mechanical efficiency across the ledgers. Once, this room had been her sanctuary, the place where she and Rowan had plotted expansion, solved problems, built something extraordinary together. Now it felt like a mausoleum, haunted by the ghost of a relationship she couldn't understand losing. "Miss Ashford?" Mrs. Brennan appeared in the doorway, her round face creased with concern. "You've been working since dawn. You should eat something." "I'm fine, Mrs. Brennan." "You're skin and bones, child, and your eyes have that hollow look again." Lena set down her pen, mustering a smile that felt like lifting stone. "I appreciate your concern, but truly, I'm well. Just focused on getting these orders finalized before the first snow." The housekeeper lingered, clearly wanting to say more. Mrs. Brennan had been at Blackridge Hall since before Lena arrived, had witnessed the close bond between Rowan and his ward, and had watched with increasing distress as that bond withered into cold formality. "He's out riding the northern fence line," Mrs. Brennan said quietly. "If you wanted to join him, Mr. Hale prefers to ride alone these days." Lena kept her voice carefully neutral, refusing to let the hurt bleed through. "I wouldn't want to impose." "That boy doesn't know what he wants?" Mrs. Brennan muttered, but she left, closing the door with a soft click. Alone again, Lena allowed her professional mask to slip. She pressed her palms against her eyes, fighting the familiar ache of abandonment. What had she done wrong? She'd replayed that day in the office 1,000 times. The McGregor contract, her excitement, Rowan's sudden coldness. One moment they were partners, friends, the two people who understood each other better than anyone else in the world. The next, he'd frozen her out completely. 4 years. 4 years of trying to win back his approval, his attention, his regard. 4 years of watching him transform from her protector and mentor into a distant stranger who looked through her rather than at her. 4 years of slowly understanding that whatever she'd been to Rowan Hale, she wasn't anymore, and nothing she did would change that. The worst part was continuing to live in his house, work in his business, inhabit his world while being utterly shut out from his life. She existed in a peculiar limbo, too educated and capable to be dismissed as mere household staff, too unwanted to be treated as family, a ghost in silk dresses, performing duties no one acknowledged, present but invisible. Lena had considered leaving. More than once, she'd drafted letters to friends her father had made in his surveying work, asking about opportunities elsewhere. But she had no fortune of her own, no family connections beyond the Hales, no practical way to maintain the lifestyle she'd grown accustomed to without Rowan's continued support. She was trapped by circumstance and by the terrible, persistent hope that maybe tomorrow Rowan would remember who she used to be to him. The door opened again without warning. Rowan filled the frame, trail dust still on his boots, his hat in his hands. At 29, he'd grown into his authority completely. Tall and broad-shouldered, his face weathered by sun and wind, those ice-blue eyes that could read land and livestock with equal precision, now utterly unreadable when they glanced at her. "The northern fence needs repair," he said without preamble. "I've assigned Marcus and his crew. Make a note in the maintenance log." "Of course." Lena reached for the ledger, hyper-aware of his presence, hating herself for the way her pulse quickened just because he was near. "Anything else?" "The Harrisons are hosting a dinner party next week. Business opportunity, railroad expansion discussion. You'll attend." Lena looked up sharply. In 4 years, Rowan had never included her in social events. She'd been relegated to the office and the margins, excluded from the public-facing aspects of Blackridge business. "You want me there?" she asked carefully. "Mrs. Harrison specifically requested your presence. Apparently she's heard about your work with the Valley consolidation and wants to discuss similar strategies for her husband's holdings." Rowan's tone suggested this was purely transactional. "You'll represent Blackridge interests appropriately." "I see." Lena's hope, which had flickered treacherously to life, died just as quickly, not because he wanted her company, because she was useful. "I'll prepare accordingly." Rowan nodded, already turning to leave. Then he paused, and for just a moment, something flickered across his face. Regret, perhaps, or pain, or some emotion quickly suppressed before Lena could identify it. "You look tired," he said abruptly. "You're working too hard." The unexpected concern pierced through Lena's carefully constructed armor like a blade between ribs. "I'm fine," she said, echoing what she'd told Mrs. Brennan, what she told everyone who noticed the shadows under her eyes and the weight she'd lost. "You're not fine." Rowan's voice carried an edge now, frustration leaking through. "You're burning yourself out over accounts and contracts that can wait. When was the last time you took a day for yourself? Went riding, read for pleasure, did anything besides work?" The hypocrisy was staggering. "When was the last time you did?" Lena shot back, anger finally breaking through her restraint. "You're out before dawn and working past midnight. If I'm burning out, I learned it from you." "That's different. Because you're the master of Blackridge and I'm just the orphan you took in?" Lena stood, months of accumulated hurt sharpening her words to weapons. "You taught me to work this land, taught me to solve problems, to think strategically, to give everything I had to something worth building. Then you turned around and shut me out of everything that mattered. You don't get to criticize my work ethic when work is all you left me." Rowan stared at her, something dangerous moving behind his eyes. "Lena, I'll attend the Harrison dinner," she interrupted, unwilling to hear whatever excuse or justification he was preparing to offer. "I'll represent Blackridge interests appropriately, as you said. Was there anything else?" The muscle in Rowan's jaw ticked. For a long moment he simply looked at her, and Lena thought she saw something like anguish cross his face. Then his expression shuddered completely, that familiar ice sliding back into place. "No," he said quietly. "Nothing else." He left, and Lena sank back into her chair, trembling with the aftermath of anger and something darker, the growing realization that she couldn't live like this anymore, couldn't continue existing in this half-life, forever hoping for a warmth that would never return. She needed to leave Blackridge Hall. Not someday, not when circumstances aligned, but soon, before the loneliness and rejection hollowed her out completely. The question was how. The Harrison dinner, 1 week later. Lena descended the main staircase of Blackridge Hall, dressed for battle. The gown was new, midnight blue silk that Mrs. Brennan had helped her select from the dressmaker in town, fitted perfectly to Lena's slender frame, elegant without being ostentatious. Her dark hair was styled in a sophisticated twist, and she wore the only jewelry she owned, a simple silver pendant that had belonged to her mother. Rowan waited at the base of the stairs, formal in evening dress, looking like he'd stepped out of some East Coast drawing room rather than a frontier ranch. He glanced up as she descended, and Lena watched his eyes widen fractionally before he caught himself. "You look—" He paused, seeming to struggle for words. "Appropriate." "Thank you," Lena said coolly, accepting his offered arm with the bare minimum of physical contact. "Shall we go?" The ride to Harrison Ranch took 20 minutes. 20 minutes of excruciating silence broken only by the sound of hooves and the creak of the carriage. Lena stared out the window, hyper-aware of Rowan's presence beside her, of the warmth radiating from his body in the close confines of the carriage, of every breath and movement. "Lena." Rowan's voice came quiet, almost hesitant. "About what you said last week. I'd rather not discuss it." Lena kept her gaze fixed on the passing landscape. "You've made your position clear over the past 4 years. I understand where I stand." "You don't understand. Then explain it to me." Lena turned to face him directly, past caring about propriety or self-protection. "Tell me what I did that made you stop seeing me. Stop talking to me. Stop treating me like I mattered, because I have racked my brain trying to figure it out, Rowan, and I come up empty every time." Rowan's face was a study in internal warfare. "It's complicated. I'm quite intelligent. I'm sure I can follow." "Lena." "We're here," the driver called out, and the moment shattered. Rowan's expression closed off like a door slamming shut, and Lena wanted to scream with frustration. But the carriage was stopping, and the Harrisons were emerging to greet them, and there was nothing to do but paste on a social smile and play her role. The dinner party was larger than Lena had anticipated. 20 guests, all influential Valley landowners and business interests, gathered in the Harrisons' impressive dining room. Mrs. Harrison, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s, made a point of seating Lena between herself and a man Lena didn't recognize. Middle-aged, well-dressed, with the kind of polished charm that came from city living. "Miss Ashford," Mrs. Harrison said warmly, "allow me to introduce Mr. Victor Crane. He's new to the Valley, purchased the old Webster property last month. Victor, this is Lena Ashford, the brilliant young woman I was telling you about." Victor Crane's smile was white and practiced. "The famous Miss Ashford. I've heard impressive things about your business acumen." He had a slight Eastern accent, refined vowels that marked him as educated and cosmopolitan. It's rare to find someone so young with such a sophisticated understanding of land economics. "Mr. Crane is being generous," Lena said, accepting his handshake. "I've had excellent teachers." "Yes, Rowan Hale." Victor's gaze flicked to where Rowan sat several seats away, deep in conversation with railroad executives. "Quite the mentor, I understand, though from what I hear, the student may have surpassed the teacher." It was flattery, obvious and deliberate, but Lena found herself responding to it anyway. When was the last time someone had praised her work? Acknowledged her contributions? Rowan certainly hadn't, not in years. The dinner progressed with multiple courses and flowing wine, and Lena found herself drawn into animated conversation with Victor Crane. He was knowledgeable about agriculture, well-traveled, full of stories about innovations happening in other regions. He listened when she spoke, asked intelligent questions, seemed genuinely interested in her opinions. "You should visit the Webster property," Victor said as dessert was served. "I'm implementing some new irrigation techniques I learned in California. I'd value your professional assessment." "I'd be happy to," Lena said, and meant it. Here was someone who saw her as capable, valuable, worth consulting. It was intoxicating after years of invisibility. Across the table, Rowan's gaze found hers. Even from a distance, Lena could read the warning in his eyes. "Be careful. Don't trust easily. Remember, this is business, not friendship." The silent command made her bristle. He'd forfeited the right to protect her when he'd abandoned her to loneliness. "Perhaps next week?" Victor pressed. "I'd be honored to show you around." "Next week would be perfect," Lena agreed and ignored the way Rowan's jaw tightened. The evening ended with handshakes and pleasantries, and soon Lena found herself back in the carriage with Rowan, heading home through darkness broken only by lantern light. "Victor Crane," Rowan said without preamble, his voice hard. "What do you know about him?" That he's new to the valley, educated and interested in innovative agricultural practices, Lena replied. Why? Because men like that don't move to frontier territories without reason. He's running from something or toward something, and either way it makes him dangerous. Not everything is a threat, Rowan. Some people are simply what they appear to be. In my experience, that's rarely true. Rowan turned to face her in the dimness. I want you to be careful around him. Don't accept any invitations without my knowledge. Don't what? Lena's anger flared bright and hot. Don't live my life? Don't speak to people who treat me with respect and courtesy? Don't dare to have a conversation with someone who actually seems to value my opinion. That's not what I meant. Then what did you mean? Because it sounds like you want to control who I associate with, despite spending the last 4 years making it abundantly clear that you want nothing to do with me personally. Lena, for Christ's sake, I'm trying to protect you. From what? From someone being kind to me? From the possibility of building a connection with another human being? Lena's voice cracked despite her best efforts. You don't get it both ways, Rowan. You can't freeze me out and then dictate my relationships. You can't abandon me and then claim protection. You gave up that right when you stopped being my friend. The carriage lurched to a stop outside Blackridge Hall. Lena didn't wait for assistance. She flung open the door and climbed down herself, gathering her skirts to stride toward the house. Lena, wait! She couldn't. If she stopped, if she turned around and saw whatever expression Rowan was wearing, she might break completely. So she kept walking, through the front door and up the stairs to her room, where she finally allowed herself to crumble. 4 years of rejection, 4 years of trying to be good enough, smart enough, worthy enough to matter to him again. And in one evening, a stranger had given her more genuine attention than Rowan had in all that time. Maybe it was time to stop waiting for Rowan Hale to remember she existed. Maybe it was time to build a life of her own. The weeks that followed the Harrison dinner became a study in careful warfare. Lena accepted Victor Crane's invitation to tour the Webster property, and then another invitation for lunch at the town's finest hotel, and then a third to attend a regional agricultural exposition 2 valleys over. Each time she informed Rowan as a courtesy, not a request for permission. Each time she watched his face harden into that impenetrable mask, saw the muscle in his jaw tick with suppressed objection. But he never forbade her, never pulled rank as the man whose house she lived in, whose charity sustained her. He simply watched her leave with Victor Crane's hand at her elbow, his ice-blue eyes tracking her departure like a predator observing prey slipping beyond reach. It should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt like slow-motion disaster. You're glowing, Victor said as they walked through the exposition grounds, past displays of new threshing equipment and drought-resistant seed varieties. I don't think I've seen you smile this much since we met. Lena adjusted her parasol against the autumn sun. It's nice to be out. Blackridge can feel rather confining. I imagine so. Victor's tone was sympathetic, carefully calibrated. Living under another man's authority, brilliant as you are. It must be frustrating. Rowan gave me a home when I had nothing, Lena said, the familiar defense automatic even now. I'm grateful for everything he's provided. Gratitude and happiness aren't the same thing. Victor stopped walking, turning to face her directly. His brown eyes were warm, earnest, completely focused on her. You deserve more than gratitude, Lena. You deserve to be valued, celebrated, free to build your own legacy, not exist in someone else's shadow. The words struck something raw and tender in Lena's chest. That's a lovely sentiment, but practical reality is rather different. I have no fortune of my own, no family connections beyond the Hales. Freedom requires resources I don't possess. What if I told you that could change? Lena studied him carefully. I'm listening. Victor smiled, that polished, practiced expression that had charmed half the valley since his arrival. I'm expanding Webster Ranch significantly. I need a partner, someone with deep knowledge of this region, someone the other landowners respect, someone with the strategic mind to help me build something extraordinary. I need you, Lena. As what, exactly? A consultant? A business manager? As my wife. The words hung in the air between them like a thrown gauntlet. Lena's breath caught, genuine shock breaking through her composure. They'd known each other barely 2 months. This was precipitous, impossible, utterly inappropriate by every social standard. Victor, hear me out. He took her hand, his grip warm and steady. I know this seems sudden, but I'm a practical man, Lena, and I recognize value when I see it. You have exactly what I need to succeed here: knowledge, connections, intelligence. And I have what you need: independence, security, a partnership built on mutual respect rather than obligation or charity. You're proposing a business arrangement disguised as marriage. I'm proposing a marriage built on honest foundations rather than romantic illusions. Victor's thumb traced circles on her palm, a gesture calculated to soothe and seduce simultaneously. We like each other. We work well together. We could build an empire, you and I. Isn't that better than wasting away in Rowan Hale's prison of indifference? Lena withdrew her hand, needing distance to think clearly. Her mind raced through implications and consequences. Marriage to Victor meant freedom from Blackridge Hall, from the daily torture of Rowan's proximity and coldness. It meant purpose, partnership, agency over her own life. The fact that she didn't love Victor seemed almost irrelevant. She'd stopped believing in love the day Rowan had first frozen her out. I need time, she said finally. This is too important to decide impulsively. Of course. Take all the time you need. Victor's smile widened, confident now, sensing victory. But don't take too long, Lena. Opportunities like this don't wait forever. They returned to the exposition, but Lena processed nothing of the displays or conversations that followed. Her mind churned with possibility and fear in equal measure. Could she really marry Victor Crane? Build a life separate from Rowan, from Blackridge, from everything she'd known for the past 9 years? The answer, terrifying and exhilarating in equal parts, was yes. She could. She would have to. Because staying meant slow death by 1,000 silent cuts, and Lena Ashford had not survived orphanhood and abandonment just to wither away from loneliness in a house that would never be home. That evening, she returned to Blackridge Hall to find Rowan waiting in the main parlor, a glass of whiskey in his hand and fury radiating from every line of his body. We need to talk, he said without preamble. If this is about Victor, damn right it's about Victor Crane. Rowan set down his glass with enough force to make it crack. I had Marcus run inquiries. Your charming suitor has debts from here to Philadelphia. He bought the Webster property with borrowed money he can't repay. The irrigation innovations? Funded by promissory notes he has no way of making good on. The man is drowning, Lena, and he's looking for a life raft. Lena removed her gloves with deliberate calm. And you think I'm that life raft? I think you're the only person in this valley young enough and inexperienced enough to mistake his attention for genuine interest. He's courting you because you have access to Blackridge resources. Through you, he thinks he can negotiate favorable terms, maybe even convince me to bail him out or enter partnership. You're a means to an end. How flattering that you think I'm so easily manipulated. I think you're lonely and vulnerable, and he's a predator who knows how to exploit that. Rowan moved closer, his presence overwhelming in the confines of the parlor. I won't let him use you. Lena laughed, the sound bitter and sharp. You won't let him? You don't get a vote, Rowan. You gave up that privilege when you spent 4 years treating me like furniture. I was protecting you. From what? Lena shouted, her careful control finally shattering completely. From feeling valued? From human connection? From the possibility of building a life that doesn't revolve around you and your precious valley? From me! Rowan's voice cracked like thunder, the admission torn from somewhere deep and anguished. I was protecting you from me, you impossible woman. The words hit like a physical blow. Lena stared at him, trying to process meaning from the raw emotion bleeding through his usual restraint. What are you talking about? Rowan turned away, ran his hands through his hair in a gesture of pure frustration. When he spoke again, his voice was lower, controlled with visible effort. You were 17, my ward, my responsibility. And I looked at you and felt things that were completely inappropriate. So I did what was necessary. I put distance between us before I could act on impulses that would have destroyed everything. The confession settled over Lena like snowfall, silent, cold, suffocating in its implications. You wanted me, she said slowly, testing the words. So you froze me out. I couldn't trust myself around you, couldn't risk acting on feelings that were fundamentally wrong given our positions. You deserve better than being pursued by the man who held all power over your circumstances. So instead you gave me 4 years of silence and rejection. Lena's voice shook with a complicated mixture of anger and something perilously close to grief. 4 years of thinking I'd done something wrong, that I was worthless, unwanted. You thought that was better? I thought that was honor. Rowan faced her again, and the pain in his eyes was naked, devastating. I thought I was doing the right thing. The right thing would have been honesty. The right thing would have been treating me like an adult capable of making my own choices. Lena moved toward him now, propelled by years of accumulated hurt seeking outlet. Instead, you made decisions for me, about me, without ever consulting me. You played protector and judge and executioner all at once, and I paid the price for your noble suffering. Lena? No, you don't get to confess now and expect absolution. You don't get to reveal your reasons and have everything magically fixed. She stopped directly in front of him, close enough to see the lines exhaustion and worry had carved around his eyes. You broke something between us, Rowan. You shattered trust and friendship and partnership because you couldn't handle your own feelings like an adult. And now Victor Crane, debt-ridden predator that he may be, offers me more honesty and respect than you've shown in years. You can't seriously be considering his proposal. He told you about that? The whole valley is talking about it. He's made sure everyone knows he intends to marry Thomas Ashford's daughter, secure his position through your connections. Rowan's hands clenched into fists. It's a business transaction to him, Lena. Nothing more. Then we'll be well matched, Lena said coldly, because that's all I have left in me. Business transactions. You made sure of that when you killed every softer feeling I had. She pushed past him, heading for the stairs, needing escape before she did something catastrophic like cry or scream or hit him. But Rowan's voice stopped her at the doorway. If you marry him, I'll cut you off completely. No more access to Blackridge resources. No more consulting on Valley business. No more financial support of any kind. You'll be entirely dependent on a man who can't pay his own debts. Lena turned slowly. Is that a threat? It's a consequence. Victor Crane is using you. I won't enable it by providing the resources he's actually after. Then I'll make do without them. Lena met his gaze with absolute defiance. I've survived worse than poverty, Rowan. I survived you. She climbed the stairs without looking back, each step an act of will against the urge to collapse. Only when she reached her room and locked the door did she allow herself to fall apart. Great, gasping sobs that racked her entire frame, mourning not what Rowan had confessed, but what he'd destroyed with years of silence and misguided protection. He'd wanted her. All this time, beneath the ice and distance, he'd carried feelings he'd deemed too inappropriate to acknowledge. The revelation should have changed everything. Instead, it changed nothing. Because wanting someone and choosing them were entirely different acts, and Rowan had chosen pride and propriety over honesty and trust. Victor Crane might be a predator, but at least he was an honest one, pursuing what he wanted with transparent calculation. There was something almost refreshing about his mercenary clarity after drowning in Rowan's silent martyrdom for years. 3 days later, Lena gave Victor her answer. They announced the engagement at a valley gathering hosted by the Harrisons, Victor's arm around her waist as he toasted their future with champagne and charm. Lena wore a smile she'd practiced in the mirror until it looked genuine, accepting congratulations from neighbors who'd watched her grow up in Rowan Hale's shadow. Rowan didn't attend. His absence spoke louder than any objection could have. You're making a terrible mistake, Seth. Mrs. Brennan said that night, helping Lena undress after the party. The housekeeper's face was lined with worry and disapproval in equal measure. That man doesn't love you, child. He loves what you can do for him. Then we're equals, Lena replied, stepping out of her gown. Because I don't love him either. I'm choosing security and partnership over romantic delusions. Isn't that practical? It's heartbreaking is what it is. Mrs. Brennan's eyes glistened. You deserve to be loved, Lena. Truly loved, not used. Love is a luxury I can't afford. Lena kept her voice steady through force of will. This is survival. I'm very good at survival. The wedding was set for 6 weeks hence, scandalously fast by Valley standards, but Victor insisted they had no reason to wait, and Lena wanted it done before she lost her nerve. The preparations consumed her days, dress fittings, menu selections, guest lists, all the elaborate machinery of frontier society weddings. Rowan made himself scarce. He spent long days riding the far boundaries, returned late at night, took his meals in his office rather than the dining room. The few times Lena encountered him in passing, he looked haggard, older than his 29 years, those ice blue eyes shadowed with something that looked uncomfortably like grief. She hardened her heart against pity. This was his choice as much as hers. He could have fought for her honestly, openly, years ago. Instead, he'd hidden behind propriety and power dynamics, and now he was reaping what he'd sown. 2 weeks before the wedding, Victor began pressing for details about Blackridge finances. "Your knowledge of Hale operations is valuable," he said over dinner at his ranch, his hand covering hers on the table. "Once we're married, I'd like your help negotiating some arrangements with Rowan. Nothing aggressive, just mutually beneficial partnerships that could help both our properties thrive." Warning bells clanged in Lena's mind. What kind of arrangements? Water rights, primarily. Webster Ranch borders Blackridge on the eastern edge. Shared access to Willow Creek could benefit us both, with proper agreements in place. Rowan will never agree to share water rights. He's fought too hard to consolidate valley resources. Victor's smile didn't quite reach his eyes. "That's where you come in, darling. You know how he thinks. You know what arguments might sway him. Together we could craft a proposal he'd find difficult to refuse. You want me to manipulate him? I want you to use your considerable intelligence and intimate knowledge to our advantage. That's what partnership means, leveraging each other's strengths." Lena withdrew her hand slowly. "Let me be very clear, Victor. Whatever knowledge I have of Blackridge operations stays private. I won't be party to any scheme that exploits my history, there for your gain." Something flickered across Victor's face. Irritation, quickly masked. "Of course not. I apologize if I implied otherwise. I simply thought, since you've been so involved in Blackridge business, you might want to continue contributing your expertise in new contexts." The words were reasonable. The tone was reasonable. But something in the way Victor watched her, calculating and cold beneath the charm, made Lena's instincts scream danger. Maybe Rowan had been right. Maybe she was the naive one, so desperate for escape that she'd walked willingly into another trap. "I'm tired," she said, standing abruptly. "I should head back to Blackridge." "Let me drive you." "No, I'll take my own horse. I need the air." She left before Victor could object, collecting her mare from his stables and riding through gathering dusk toward home. Except Blackridge Hall wasn't home, not really. It was a way station, a temporary shelter she'd outstayed by years. Soon she'd trade it for another borrowed space in Victor's ranch house, another life lived at someone else's sufferance. The realization hit her like a physical blow. She was trading one prison for another, swapping Rowan's cold distance for Victor's warm manipulation. Neither option offered true freedom. Neither gave her agency over her own existence. Lost in thought, Lena didn't notice the rider approaching until he was nearly upon her. She looked up to find Rowan on his stallion, blocking the path, his face grim in the fading light. "We need to talk," he said. "I'm tired of talking to men who think they own me." "5 minutes. Please, Lena." The please stopped her. Rowan Hale didn't beg, didn't ask. He commanded, decreed, controlled. Hearing vulnerability in his voice was so unprecedented that curiosity overrode her anger. 5 minutes, she agreed. They dismounted, leading their horses to a small grove of cottonwoods near the creek. The water burbled over stones, a peaceful soundtrack to the tension crackling between them. "I've been making inquiries," Rowan said without preamble. "Victor Crane's debts are worse than I initially thought. He owes significant money to some very dangerous people back east. People who don't accept late payments kindly. I'm aware he has financial difficulties." "Are you aware that he's been spreading rumors, telling creditors that his marriage to Thomas Ashford's daughter will give him leverage over the Hale empire, that he'll have access to resources sufficient to settle all accounts?" Lena's stomach dropped. "That's a lie." "Is it? Because from what I hear, he's been quite specific about how your intimate knowledge of Blackridge operations and your influence over Rowan Hale will translate to financial opportunities." Rowan's voice was hard, controlled fury, barely leashed. "He's selling you as a commodity, Lena, promising your value to people who will collect on those promises one way or another. You're trying to frighten me. I'm trying to save you from making an irreversible mistake." Rowan moved closer, his face desperate now, all masks stripped away. "Call off the wedding. Stay here. Let me protect you properly this time. Under what terms? Lena demanded. As your ward? Your business partner? Your guilty secret? What exactly are you offering, Rowan? He stared at her and she watched him war with himself. Pride against need, propriety against desire, control against the terrifying vulnerability of honesty. For a moment she thought he might finally say the words that could change everything. Then his expression shuddered. As family, you belong at Blackridge, under my protection. That's enough. And just like that, the fragile possibility shattered. No, Lena said quietly. It's not enough. Not anymore. She remounted her horse and rode away, leaving Rowan standing alone in the gathering darkness. Behind her, she heard him call her name once, anguished and raw. She didn't turn back. 10 days before the wedding, Victor's mask began to slip entirely. I need to borrow against your dowry, he announced over breakfast at Blackridge Hall. He'd been joining her there most mornings, establishing his presence, marking territory. Just temporarily, to settle some pressing accounts. Once we're married, we can renegotiate terms with my creditors from a stronger position. I don't have a dowry, Lena said carefully. Rowan made clear he's providing no financial support for this marriage. Victor's fork clattered against his plate. That's unacceptable. You've worked for him for years without proper compensation. He owes you. He owes me nothing. Everything I have, he's given freely. I've been a guest in his house, nothing more. A guest? Victor's laugh was ugly. Is that what you call it? You've been his unpaid laborer, his consultant, his... Careful, Lena warned, ice in her voice. But Victor was past careful. The charming facade cracked like cheap porcelain, revealing something desperate and dangerous beneath. Do you have any idea how much money I owe? How many people are waiting to collect? I thought you understood what this marriage was. A solution to both our problems. You get independence. I get access to Blackridge resources through you. I never promised you access to anything. You let me believe it. Victor stood abruptly, pacing like a caged animal. You talked about your work with the Valley Consolidation, your partnerships with Rowan, your knowledge of land deals and water rights. What the hell was I supposed to think except that you'd bring that value into our marriage? Lena rose slowly, understanding dawning with sick clarity. You never wanted me. You wanted a key to Blackridge. I wanted a solution, and you presented yourself as one, walking around those parties talking about your business expertise, making sure everyone knew how integral you were to Hale operations. Victor's face flushed red with anger and fear. You can't back out now. The wedding is announced. My creditors are counting on this. If you leave me hanging, I'm ruined. That sounds like a personal problem. His hand shot out, gripping her wrist with bruising force. You don't understand what these people will do if I don't pay. What they'll do to me. To you, if they think you're the reason I can't deliver. Lena looked down at his hand on her wrist, then up at his face with absolute contempt. Let go. Lena, please. Now he was begging, the charm returning desperately. I'm sorry, that was out of line. I'm just under tremendous pressure. If you could just talk to Rowan, convince him to reconsider the financial support, I could... The door burst open. Rowan filled the frame, and the expression on his face promised violence. Get your hands off her, he said, each word precise and deadly. Victor released Lena's wrist immediately, stepping back. This is a private conversation. The hell it is. Rowan crossed the room in 3 strides, placing himself between Lena and Victor like a living shield. You're done here, Crane. Get out of my house. I'm your guest. You're a con artist and a liar who's been using my ward to access resources you have no right to. Rowan's voice could have cut glass. I've contacted your creditors back east, made some arrangements to settle your debts directly on the condition that you leave this valley and never contact Lena again. Victor's face went white. You can't. I can and I have. Your debts are paid. You're free to go. Consider it a wedding gift, since there won't be a wedding. Rowan produced a bank draft from his coat pocket, tossed it contemptuously at Victor's feet. Take it and disappear, or decline and explain to your creditors why you turned down a clean settlement. Your choice. The calculation in Victor's eyes was ugly to witness. Lena watched him weigh options, her value versus immediate salvation, pride versus survival. It took less than 10 seconds for him to bend and retrieve the draft. Pleasure doing business with you, Hale, Victor said, trying for dignity and achieving only bitterness. He didn't look at Lena as he left, and she felt nothing watching him go. No sadness, no relief, just a vast emptiness where hope had briefly tried to take root. When they were alone, Rowan turned to her. Are you hurt? Let me see your wrist. Lena pulled away from his reaching hand. Don't. Lena, you paid him off. Bought my freedom like a business transaction. She laughed, the sound hollow. How is that any different from what he was doing? Using money to control outcomes to shape my life according to your preferences. I was protecting you from a dangerous man. No, you were protecting your investment, keeping your asset close, making sure I stayed under your control instead of transferring to someone else's. The accusation poured out, fueled by weeks of suppressed rage and pain. You don't want me, Rowan. You just don't want anyone else to have me. The words landed like blows. Rowan recoiled as though she'd struck him physically. That's not true. Isn't it? You've had 4 years to be honest about your feelings. 4 years to treat me like an adult, capable of making choices. Instead, you hid behind propriety and protection, and now you've proven exactly what I mean to you. Property to be guarded, resources to be controlled, never an equal partner with agency of her own. I love you. The words exploded from Rowan like a dam breaking. I have loved you since you were 17 years old, and it's terrified me every single day since. I pushed you away because loving you felt like a betrayal of every trust your father placed in me, every responsibility I accepted the day I brought you to Black Ridge. But don't you dare say I don't want you. You're all I've ever wanted, and it's destroyed me watching you slip away. The confession hung between them, too late and too raw. Lena felt tears streaming down her face, hot and bitter. If you loved me, she whispered, you would have trusted me enough to be honest. You would have given me the choice instead of making it for me. Love without trust is just another prison, Rowan. And I'm so tired of living in cages built by men who claim to know what's best for me. She walked past him, up the stairs to her room, and this time he didn't try to stop her. The door to Lena's room closed with a finality that echoed through the empty hallway like a gunshot. Rowan stood at the bottom of the stairs, his confession still hanging in the air, unanswered and unwanted. His hands shook. From fury or heartbreak, he couldn't tell anymore. Maybe they were the same thing. Mrs. Brennan appeared from the kitchen, her face drawn with worry. Mr. Hale, perhaps you should— Leave it, Rowan said, his voice rough as gravel. Just leave it. He retreated to his office, poured whiskey he didn't taste, and stared at ledgers he couldn't read. The numbers blurred into meaningless shapes while his mind replayed every moment of the past 4 years. Every decision made in the name of protection that had actually been cowardice, dressed in noble clothing. He'd loved Lena since she was 17. He'd pushed her away because loving her felt wrong. She'd been his ward, his responsibility, too young and too dependent on him for any relationship between them to be anything but exploitation. He'd convinced himself that distance was honor, that silence was protection, that he was being the man Thomas Ashford would have wanted him to be. Instead, he'd driven her straight into Victor Crane's arms. A predator, a liar, a man who'd seen Lena's value only in terms of what she could access and exploit. Rowan had paid off Crane's debts, a small fortune that would set back Blackridge expansion plans by at least 2 years, and counted it cheap at the price if it meant keeping Lena safe. But she wasn't safe. Not really. She was trapped in his house, hating him, seeing his protection as just another form of control. And maybe she was right. Maybe there was no real difference between guarding someone and imprisoning them when the person being guarded never asked for either. The knock on his office door came near midnight. Rowan looked up to find Marcus, his ranch foreman, hat in hand and concern etched deep in the weathered lines of his face. "Boss, we got a problem. Unless Blackridge is on fire, it can wait until morning. It's about Crane." Marcus stepped inside, closing the door behind him. "He didn't leave the valley like you told him to. He's been at the saloon all evening, drinking heavy and talking to anyone who'll listen." Rowan's exhaustion evaporated, replaced by sharp alertness. "Talking about what?" "About you and Miss Lena. About how you've been keeping her prisoner all these years, using her skills without compensation, blocking her from any chance at marriage or independence." Marcus's discomfort was palpable. "He's making it sound like you're some kind of tyrant, boss. Says he was trying to rescue her, and you threatened him off because you wanted to keep her under your thumb." "That lying son of a—" Rowan was on his feet before he finished the sentence. Where is he now? Still at the saloon, last I heard, but boss, there's more. Marcus shifted his weight, clearly dreading what came next. Some of the Valley men are listening. You know how people talk. There's been whispers for years about Miss Lena's position here. Not quite family, not quite staff. Crane's playing on those whispers, making himself the hero in a story about a girl trapped by a powerful man. The implications hit Rowan like a physical blow. In frontier society, reputation was currency. A man's word, his honor, his standing in the community, these things determined everything from business partnerships to water rights negotiations to whether your neighbors would help you or leave you to drown when trouble came. If Victor Crane successfully painted Rowan as the villain in Lena's story, if he convinced enough people that Rowan had been exploiting her, controlling her, denying her freedom, it wouldn't just damage Rowan's reputation, it would destroy Lena's as well. She'd be seen as either complicit in her own exploitation or too weak to fight back, and either characterization would make her unmarriageable, unemployable, a social pariah in the only community she'd ever known. I need to shut this down, Rowan said, reaching for his coat. Now, before it spreads any further. Boss, maybe let me handle it. You go in there angry, it'll just confirm what Crane's saying about you being controlling, and I said now. The ride to town took 15 minutes of hard galloping through darkness broken only by moonlight. Rowan's mind raced faster than his horse's hooves, calculating approaches and responses, trying to figure out how to counter Crane's narrative without making everything worse. The saloon blazed with lamplight and noise, filled with ranch hands and valley men drinking away the week's exhaustion. Conversation died the moment Rowan pushed through the doors. Every eye turned to him, some curious, some hostile, all assessing. Victor Crane sat at the bar, his expensive coat rumpled and his face flushed with alcohol and bitter satisfaction. Ah, the master of Blackridge arrives, he announced to the room, his words only slightly slurred. Come to exercise more control, Hale? Come to buy off another inconvenient truth? Come to give you one last chance to take the settlement and leave quietly, Rowan said, keeping his voice level with effort. Before you say something you'll regret. Regret? Victor laughed, harsh and ugly. I regret believing you were an honorable man. I regret thinking Thomas Ashford's daughter was anything but a pretty face you kept around for decoration and unpaid labor. The insult to Lena broke something in Rowan's restraint. He crossed the room in 3 strides, grabbed Victor by the collar, and hauled him off his bar stool. Watch your mouth when you speak about her. Or what? Victor's smile was vicious, despite his precarious position. You'll prove me right? Show everyone here exactly how violent and controlling you really are? Rowan realized his mistake too late. Every man in the saloon was watching, seeing Rowan Hale, wealthy, powerful, feared, manhandle a man who'd positioned himself as Lena's would-be rescuer. The optics were disastrous. He released Victor, stepping back, trying to salvage the situation. You know the truth, Crane. You tried to use Lena to access Blackridge resources. I paid your debts to protect her from your schemes. That's the only story here. Is it? Victor straightened his coat, playing to his audience now. Because from where I stand, you've kept that girl isolated for years. No suitors, no prospects, no life beyond what you permit her. I offered her marriage, freedom, a chance to build something of her own. And you couldn't stand losing your convenient asset, so you threatened me, paid me off, sent me away. How is that protection, Hale? How is that anything but ownership? Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Rowan heard fragments. Always thought it was strange. Poor girl. Hale money buys everything. And felt the narrative slipping away from him like sand through fingers. Lena made her own choice to end the engagement, Rowan said, forcing calm into his voice. Once she understood your true motivations. Did she? Or did you make that choice for her the way you've made every choice in her life since she was 12 years old? Victor leaned against the bar, confidence growing as he sensed Rowan's disadvantage. Tell me, Hale, has Lena Ashford ever made a single decision without your approval? Ever been allowed to pursue anything you didn't permit? Or have you been her jailer for 9 years, dressed up as guardian and mentor? The worst part was how much truth threaded through the lies. Rowan had controlled Lena's life, benevolently, protectively, but controlled it nonetheless. He'd made decisions for her, about her, without consulting her. He'd assumed his judgment was superior. his protection necessary, his authority unquestionable, and now that assumption was being weaponized against him in front of the entire Valley community. "This conversation is over," Rowan said, turning to leave before he did something truly destructive. "Enjoy your settlement, Crane. I suggest you spend it somewhere far from here." "Why?" "Because you'll make me disappear like you've made her disappear?" Victor called after him. "How many other inconveniences have you bought off over the years, I wonder?" Rowan kept walking, ignoring the bait, hearing the speculation ignite behind him like wildfire catching dry brush. By morning, every ranch and homestead in Black Ridge Valley would be discussing Victor Crane's accusations. By next week, the story would reach neighboring valleys, other territories, spreading like poison through the interconnected web of frontier society. He'd tried to protect Lena. Instead, he'd painted a target on both their backs. The house was dark when Rowan returned except for a single lamp burning in the parlor window. He found Lena there, still dressed, a book unopened in her lap. She looked up when he entered, and the exhaustion in her face mirrored his own. "Mrs. Brennan told me you went to town," she said quietly, "to confront Victor, to stop him from spreading lies about you." "About us?" Rowan poured himself another whiskey, offered her one. She shook her head. "I made things worse." "Of course you did." There was no heat in the words, just resigned certainty. "You can't fix this with money, or authority, or force, Rowan. You can't control what people believe." "I can try, and prove Victor right in the process." Lena closed her book, set it aside with careful precision. "He's telling the Valley that you're a controlling tyrant who's kept me prisoner for years. Every time you try to manage this situation, you reinforce that narrative. Then what would you have me do? Let him destroy your reputation unchallenged?" "My reputation was never mine to control." Lena stood, moved to the window, stared out at darkness. "I've been Rowan Hale's ward for 9 years. Not Lena Ashford, not Thomas's daughter, not a person with my own identity, just an extension of you and your authority. Victor didn't create that perception, he's just exploiting it." The truth of that landed like a blade between Rowan's ribs. "I never meant—" "I know what you meant. You meant protection, provision, safety. You gave me everything except the one thing I actually needed: autonomy." She turned to face him, and the resolve in her eyes sent dread sliding down Rowan's spine. "I'm leaving Black Ridge." "No." "It's not a request, Rowan. It's a statement of fact." Lena's voice stayed steady, implacable. "I can't stay here, not anymore. Victor's accusations may be exaggerated, but they're not entirely wrong. I have been living under your authority, dependent on your approval, existing in your shadow. As long as I remain at Black Ridge Hall, that will never change." "Where will you go? You have no resources, no—" "I have skills, experience, references from managing one of the largest estates in 3 territories. A bitter smile crossed her face. "Well, I would have references, except any letter from you now looks like coercion or manipulation, so I'll have to find another way." "Lena, be reasonable." "I'm being perfectly reasonable. I'm removing myself from a situation that's become untenable for both of us." She moved toward the stairs, then paused. "For what it's worth, I believe you meant well. I believe your protection came from genuine care, even love. But good intentions don't erase the damage done, and I can't keep living in the wreckage of your noble mistakes." She climbed the stairs without waiting for a response, leaving Rowan alone with his whiskey and his failures. He stood there until dawn crept through the windows, turning the darkness gray, understanding with brutal clarity that he'd lost her. Not to Victor Crane, not to some other suitor, but to his own inability to trust her with truth and choice. By morning, Mrs. Brennan brought news that made everything infinitely worse. "There's men riding up the main road," she said, bursting into Rowan's office where he'd spent the night hunched over his desk. "A dozen at least, armed. They've got torches." Rowan was at the window in seconds, scanning the approaching riders. He recognized several valley men, ranchers, farmhands, even the blacksmith from town. They rode with the grim purpose of men who'd convinced themselves they were doing righteous work. "Get Lena," Rowan ordered. "Lock her in the east wing and don't open the door for anyone but me." "What's happening?" "Victor Crane's poison worked faster than I anticipated. Now go." Mrs. Brennan fled. Rowan armed himself, rifle and pistol both, though he prayed he wouldn't need them, and stepped onto the front porch to meet the approaching mob. Because that's what it was, dressed up in frontier justice, but fundamentally a mob, men working themselves into righteous fury over perceived wrongs. The riders pulled up in a semicircle before the house. Jacob Harrison, the railroad man's son, served as spokesman. "Rowan Hale, we're here about Lena Ashford." "She's none of your concern," Rowan said, keeping his voice level. "We disagree. We've heard disturbing things about her treatment here, about how she's been kept isolated, controlled, denied any freedom or choice in her own life." Jacob's face was set with the certainty of someone who'd never questioned his own righteousness. "We're here to offer her safe passage out of Blackridge, away from your authority." "Offer or demand?" "Depends on whether you cooperate." Rowan's hands tightened on his rifle, reading the situation with sinking dread. These men had convinced themselves they were rescuers. They'd come armed because they expected resistance, expected him to be the tyrant Victor had painted him as. If he fought them, he'd prove every accusation. If he didn't, they'd take Lena by force, rescuing her whether she wanted rescue or not. He was trapped by narrative as surely as if they'd put him in chains. "Lena is free to leave anytime she chooses," Rowan said carefully. "She doesn't need your intervention." "Then let her come out and tell us that herself. Let her speak without you standing over her, controlling what she says." Before Rowan could respond, the front door opened. Lena emerged, still in her dressing gown, her hair loose around her shoulders, Mrs. Brennan hovering anxiously behind her. "What's happening?" Lena demanded, taking in the armed riders, Rowan's defensive posture, the tension thick enough to cut. "Miss Ashford," Jacob doffed his hat respectfully, "we've come to offer you assistance. If you're being held here against your will, if Mr. Hale has been controlling or exploiting you in any way, we can provide safe escort to town, help you establish independence." Lena's eyes widened with comprehension and horror. "You think Rowan's keeping me prisoner?" "We think a young woman with no family and no resources can't make free choices when she's completely dependent on the man claiming to protect her." This from another rider, older, his face hard with judgment. "We think 9 years is a long time to live under another man's authority, without marriage or compensation or any path to real freedom." "This is insane," Lena breathed. "Is it?" Jacob pressed. "Can you honestly say you've been free to make your own choices? To pursue suitors without Hale's interference? To leave if you wanted?" Rowan watched Lena's face cycle through emotions. Shock, anger, understanding, and finally something that looked like grim calculation. She was brilliant, his Lena. She could see exactly how this situation would play out, how anything she said in his defense would be dismissed as coercion, how the Valley's perception had already calcified around Victor's version of events. "I appreciate your concern," Lena said slowly, choosing words with visible care, "but I'm not being held against my will. Mr. Hale has been nothing but—" "We understand you may feel obligated to defend him," Jacob interrupted gently. "After years of dependency, it's natural to confuse obligation with choice. But you have options now, Miss Ashford. You don't have to stay here." "I just said I'm staying by choice." "Did you choose to have your engagement to Victor Crane ended? Or did Hale make that decision for you by paying Crane off?" This from the older rider again. "Did you choose to spend 9 years working without compensation? Or did Hale decide that for you too?" Each question landed like a physical blow. Rowan could see Lena struggling, trying to defend their history, while recognizing how it looked from the outside. Every decision he'd made for her, every choice he'd controlled, every freedom he'd constrained in the name of protection. "This is my home," Lena said, but her voice wavered now. "It's his house," Jacob corrected. "You deserve your own home, Miss Ashford, your own life. We're offering you that chance." "And if I refuse?" The silence that followed was answer enough. These men had convinced themselves they were heroes. They'd come armed not because they expected Lena to resist, but because they expected Rowan to prevent her from leaving. If she refused their rescue, they'd assume she was too frightened or too controlled to accept freedom even when offered. Rowan saw the impossible position they'd trapped her in. Stay and confirm every accusation against him. Leave and validate the mob's narrative. There was no third option, no way to diffuse this situation through words or reason or truth. "Lena," he said quietly, "it's your choice. Whatever you decide, I'll support." She looked at him then, and the pain in her eyes was devastating. "Will you? Because the last time I tried to make a choice, you paid off my fiancé and sent him away." I was protecting you from a predator by controlling my options, by deciding for me what was acceptable and what wasn't. Lena's voice broke. Don't you see, Rowan? These men aren't entirely wrong. You have been making my choices. Maybe not maliciously, maybe not with bad intentions, but you've been doing it nonetheless. So what are you saying? Lena drew herself up, and Rowan recognized the expression on her face. The same determined courage she'd shown at 12 years old when her world collapsed and she'd had to survive anyway. I'm saying I'll go with them. To town, to establish some independence, to prove to everyone, including myself, that I'm capable of making my own decisions. She raised a hand to forestall his protest. Not because they're right about you being a tyrant. Not because I believe Victor's lies. But because I need to know I can survive outside your shadow. And apparently, so does everyone else in this valley. The words hit Rowan like bullets. He'd failed her so completely that even defending him now damaged her reputation. The only way to save her was to let her go. Let these men believe they'd rescued her from him, accept the villain's role in a story he'd never meant to write. Pack whatever you need, Rowan said, the words ash in his mouth. Take as much time as... No. Lena's voice was firm. If I'm doing this, I'm doing it now. I'll send for my things later. She walked down the porch steps in her dressing gown, barefoot in the morning cold, and accepted Jacob Harrison's offered hand to mount behind him on his horse. The symbolism was deliberate, devastating. Lena Ashford being rescued from Rowan Hale's control, choosing freedom over comfort, riding away from Blackridge Hall like a prisoner escaping captivity. Rowan forced himself to stand still, to watch her go, to not fight or protest or beg, because fighting would prove every accusation. Protesting would make him the tyrant they believed him to be. Begging would humiliate them both and change nothing. The riders turned, carrying Lena away, and Rowan felt something inside him break irreparably. Mrs. Brennan appeared at his elbow, tears streaming down her weathered face. This is wrong, all wrong. They've got no right. They have exactly the right they've claimed, Rowan said hollowly. I gave it to them. 4 years of silence and control and good intentions. I built the prison everyone sees. I just never meant to be the jailer. He watched until the riders disappeared into the distance. Lena's dark hair the last thing visible before they crested the ridge and vanished. Then he walked back into his house, his empty, echoing house, and understood with brutal clarity that he'd lost more than Lena. He'd lost any moral authority to claim he'd been protecting her, because protection that someone never asked for, that trapped them in dependency and stripped them of agency, that controlled their choices in the name of their own good, that wasn't protection at all. That was just tyranny with a gentler name. The days that followed were a special kind of purgatory. Lena took rooms at the town's only boarding house, a respectable establishment run by the widow Mackenzie. Within hours, half the valley descended on her, offering sympathy, assistance, opportunities. The Harrison women took her shopping for proper clothing. The pastor's wife offered her a teaching position at the valley school. Merchants extended credit without collateral, and several ranchers mentioned they could use someone with her organizational skills to help manage their books. Everyone was very kind. Everyone was very concerned. And every kindness, every offer came wrapped in the unspoken assumption that she'd been liberated from Rowan Hale's oppressive control. Lena endured it with gritted teeth and forced smiles, accepting help she didn't want from people who meant well but understood nothing. She couldn't correct their misconceptions without seeming defensive or controlled. Couldn't defend Rowan without reinforcing the narrative that she was still under his influence. The truth, complicated, nuanced, involving genuine protection twisted into something darker by fear and silence, was too complex for frontier society to process. So she played the role they'd assigned her, the grateful rescued maiden, finally free to live her own life. It made her want to scream. A week after her departure from Blackridge Hall, Jacob Harrison appeared at her boarding house with news that made her blood run cold. There's been an incident, he said, hat in hand, his young face grave. At the saloon last night, Victor Crane got drunk and started making more accusations about Hale. Said he had proof that Rowan had been embezzling from your father's estate, keeping money that should have gone to you. Lena's stomach dropped. That's a lie. My father had nothing but debts when he died. Maybe so, but Crane's claiming otherwise. Says he has documents proving Thomas Ashford had significant savings that Rowan appropriated after the accident. Jacob shifted uncomfortably. It's causing talk, Miss Ashford. Bad talk. Some men are saying if Hale stole from you, he should answer for it, officially. Answer how? Trial. Legal proceedings. Recovery of stolen assets. Jacob's expression was pained. I don't believe Crane, personally. The man's a proven liar and con artist. But others are listening. They want to see the Hale estate books, verify that everything was handled properly. The malicious brilliance of Victor's new strategy hit Lena like a physical blow. He'd failed to access Blackridge resources through marriage. He'd failed to destroy Rowan's reputation solely through accusations of control. So now he was inventing financial crimes, betting that a community already primed to believe the worst about Rowan Hale would demand investigation, force open the estate books, create chaos and scandal that Victor could somehow exploit. Where is Victor now? Lena demanded. Still in the valley, still drinking, still talking. Jacob hesitated. Miss Ashford, I need to ask, do you know anything about your father's finances? Anything that might confirm or deny Crane's claims? I know my father died with nothing but the clothes on his back and debts to the company store. I know Rowan took me in anyway, provided everything from that day forward without expectation of repayment. Lena's voice hardened. I also know Victor Crane is a desperate man inventing lies because Rowan paid off his real debts. This is retaliation, pure and simple. Then you'd testify to that? If it came to formal proceedings? I'd testify to the truth. Whether anyone believes me is another question entirely. Jacob nodded slowly. There's something else. Harrison Ranch received a telegram this morning from Philadelphia asking about Victor Crane's whereabouts and requesting information about any assets or opportunities he might have secured in Blackridge Valley. From his creditors? From people Rowan didn't pay off. Apparently Crane's debts run deeper than anyone knew. These particular creditors aren't the sort who accept settlements through intermediaries. They want direct accounting. Jacob's face was grim. And they're coming here to get it. The pieces clicked together in Lena's mind with terrible clarity. Victor had been using his extended stay in the valley to spread lies about Rowan, yes. But he'd also been buying time, trying desperately to find some way, any way, to access resources sufficient to satisfy creditors who wouldn't be paid off with Rowan's money. Now those creditors were coming to collect, and Victor was trapped. A trapped, desperate man with nothing to lose was the most dangerous kind. I need to see Rowan, Lena said abruptly. Now. Miss Ashford, I'm not sure that's wise. The Valley's still talking about your rescue from his control. If you're seen going back to Blackridge Hall, I don't care what the Valley thinks anymore. Lena was already moving, grabbing her shawl, heading for the door. Victor Crane is escalating because he's cornered. If creditors are coming who Rowan can't buy off, if they believe Victor has access to Blackridge resources through me, they'll come for me too. This isn't about reputation anymore, Jacob. This is about actual danger. She didn't wait for his response. She commandeered a horse from the boarding house stable. She'd have to apologize to Mrs. Mackenzie later, and rode hard for Blackridge Hall, her heart pounding in rhythm with the horse's hooves. The valley spread around her in all its autumn beauty, mountains touched with early snow, grasslands turning gold, creeks running clear and cold. This land had been her home for 9 years. She'd learned every ridge and valley, every water source and grazing meadow. She'd helped build something extraordinary here, working alongside Rowan to consolidate the valley, create prosperity, forge a legacy. And now it was all burning down because of pride and fear and the impossibility of honest communication. Blackridge Hall appeared on the horizon, and Lena felt her throat tighten with complicated emotion. How many times had she ridden this path, returning home after surveys or negotiations or simple pleasure rides? How many evenings had she and Rowan sat on that porch, planning expansions and solving problems and building something together? All of it was gone now, destroyed not by Victor Crane, but by their own inability to trust each other with truth. Rowan was in the stables when she arrived, grooming his stallion with methodical precision. He looked up at the sound of hoofbeats, and the expression that crossed his face, hope, pain, longing, made Lena's chest ache. "You came back," he said, the words barely audible. "I came to warn you. Victor's creditors from Philadelphia are on their way, the ones you didn't pay off." Lena dismounted, moved closer, needing him to understand the danger. They think Victor has access to Black Ridge resources through me. When they discover he doesn't, when they realize he's been lying about his prospects here, they'll want compensation from someone, Rowan finished grimly. And since I'm the one who paid off his other debts, I'm the obvious target. More than that, Victor's been telling the valley you embezzled from my father's estate. He's creating a narrative where you're the villain who profited from my family's tragedy. If his creditors believe that story, they'll demand restitution from Hale assets, claim I owe you a debt that they can collect on your behalf. Rowan's expression darkened with understanding. It's elegant, in a vicious way. Use the valley's existing suspicions to create a legal framework for plundering Black Ridge resources. We need to stop him, expose his lies before the creditors arrive, and turn this into something we can't control. How? The valley already believes I'm a controlling tyrant. Anything I say against Victor just reinforces that perception. Rowan set down the grooming brush, faced her directly. And you, if you defend me now, after being rescued from my authority, the valley will think you've been manipulated back under my control. We're trapped by narrative, Lena. Truth doesn't matter anymore. Only the story people choose to believe. Then we change the story, Lena said fiercely. We give them a truth so compelling they can't ignore it. What truth? Lena took a breath, the decision forming even as she spoke it. That I was never your prisoner. That I chose every moment I spent at Blackridge Hall. That the only control you ever had over me was the control I willingly gave you because I trusted you, believed in you, loved what we were building together. They won't believe it. They will if I make them believe it. If I stand up publicly and tell them exactly what happened, the good and the bad, the protection and the mistakes, all of it. She moved closer, desperate for him to understand. Victor's weapon is the narrative. We counter it with radical honesty, with transparency so complete there's nothing left for him to exploit. Rowan stared at her like she'd grown a second head. That would destroy your reputation more thoroughly than anything Victor could fabricate. My reputation is already destroyed. I'm either the victim who needs rescuing or the accomplice who enabled my own exploitation. There's no version of the Valley's current story where I come out well. Lena's voice strengthened with conviction. But if I control the narrative, if I tell my own story on my own terms, at least it's truth. At least it's mine. Lena, he's taking everything from us, Rowan. Our history, our partnership, our ability to live in this valley without suspicion and judgment. I won't let him win by staying silent and hoping the lies eventually fade. I'm done being the victim in someone else's story. She saw the moment Rowan understood, really understood, what she was proposing. The fear in his eyes was naked, devastating. If you do this, if you speak publicly, there's no taking it back. Whatever you say becomes permanent record. If you admit to willing participation in the life we built, the Valley will judge you for it, call you unnatural, unwomanly, too bold, or too ambitious, or too free? Lena finished softly. Let them. I'd rather be judged for my actual choices than pitied for choices I never made. The sound of approaching horses interrupted them. Both turned to see a cluster of riders cresting the ridge. Not valleymen this time, but strangers in Eastern clothing, their horses fresh, and their faces hard, with the particular determination of men who'd traveled far to collect a debt. Victor Crane's creditors had arrived. And they weren't alone. Victor himself rode with them, his face pale but triumphant, clearly believing he'd found salvation in the form of these dangerous men. Behind them came half the valley, ranchers and farmers and townspeople who'd gotten wind of something significant happening and converged to witness it. The trap was sprung. Whatever happened next would unfold before an audience too large to dismiss or ignore. Lena looked at Rowan, saw her own understanding reflected in his eyes. This was the moment, the breaking point where everything either shattered irreparably or transformed into something new. She reached for his hand, felt his fingers close around hers with desperate strength. Together? She asked. Together, Rowan answered, and turned to face the approaching storm with Lena Ashford at his side. Not behind him, not sheltered by him, but beside him as an equal partner in whatever came next. The creditors reined in their horses 20 feet from where Rowan and Lena stood. The leader, a man in his 50s with iron-gray hair and eyes that had seen too much, dismounted with economical grace. Rowan Hale? He asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. That's right. I'm William Sutherland, representing a consortium of Philadelphia investors. We're here about Victor Crane's outstanding debts. Sutherland's gaze flicked to Lena, assessment cold and thorough. And we understand you're Lena Ashford, the woman Mr. Crane claims has been wrongfully denied her inheritance from the Hale estate. That's a lie, Lena said clearly, her voice carrying to the assembled crowd. And I'm prepared to testify to that under oath in front of anyone who wants to listen. Are you? Sutherland's smile was thin and sharp. Because Mr. Crane has provided us with a very detailed account of financial irregularities following your father's death, an account that suggests significant funds were misappropriated by Mr. Hale here, funds that legally should have been held in trust for you. Show me these accounts, Rowan demanded. Show me any documentation of these supposed funds. Victor stepped forward, producing papers from his coat with theatrical flourish. Copies of correspondence between Thomas Ashford and the Territory Surveyor's office, showing compensation due for surveys completed before his death. Compensation that was never paid to his surviving heir. Rowan took the papers, scanned them quickly, and Lena watched his expression shift from anger to shock to something like horrified understanding. These are real, he said quietly. The valley erupted in murmurs. Lena felt the ground shift beneath her feet. Not metaphorically, but genuinely, the whole world tilting as Rowan's admission validated Victor's claims. What? She breathed. Rowan looked at her, and the pain in his eyes was bottomless. Your father had completed 3 surveys in the month before his death. The compensation was paid to the Hale estate because Thomas was contracted through us. I'd forgotten completely. It was chaos after the accident. Everything happened so fast. His voice broke. The money was rolled into general operating funds. I never separated it out. Never thought to establish a trust for you because you were living here, being provided for from those same funds. But legally, technically, Victor's right. That money should have been held separately, marked as your inheritance. The confession hung in the air like a guillotine blade poised to drop and sever everything. Lena watched the valley's perception crystallize around this new information. Not malicious theft, but negligent appropriation. Still wrong, still exploitative, still exactly the kind of financial control Victor had accused Rowan of wielding. Sutherland's smile widened. So you admit to misappropriating funds belonging to Miss Ashford? I admit to an accounting error made during a crisis and never corrected. Rowan's voice steadied, the initial shock giving way to something harder. An error I'm prepared to rectify immediately. Whatever sum Thomas Ashford earned in his final month, I'll transfer to Lena plus interest calculated from the date of his death. Full accounting, full transparency, witnessed by anyone who wants to observe. How convenient, Victor sneered. Caught in your theft and suddenly generous with restitution. It's not theft if I'm volunteering repayment before being sued, Rowan shot back. And it's certainly not the fortune you've been promising your creditors, Crane. 3 surveys at territory rates? We're talking maybe $500 plus 9 years of interest. Enough to establish independence, not enough to cover your debts. Sutherland's expression darkened. Is this true, Crane? You told us there were thousands at stake. There could have been, if Hale had properly compensated Thomas Ashford's work over the years. My father was paid fairly for his work, Lena interrupted, her voice cutting through Victor's spiral. Every survey, every consultation, every project, Rowan Hale was generous to the point of excess, paying above standard rates and providing bonuses when projects succeeded. The only money in question is from my father's final month, and I'll swear to that truth in any court or investigation you'd like to pursue. She felt the moment shift again, the crowd's attention swinging like a pendulum. Victor had overplayed his hand, promised creditors a windfall that didn't exist. Rowan's admission had diffused the criminal allegation while establishing legitimate debt. And Lena's testimony, clear, confident, uncoerced, was starting to crack the narrative Victor had built. This is absurd, Victor sputtered. She's defending him because she's still under his control. Look at her. She ran back to Blackridge the moment she had the chance. I came back because I choose to be here, Lena said, her voice ringing with conviction. Not as a prisoner, not as a victim, but as a partner in everything Rowan Hale has built. Yes, he made mistakes. Yes, he controlled things he should have trusted me to decide. But I'm not some helpless girl who needs the valley's rescue. I'm a grown woman making my own choices, and I choose this. She turned to face the assembled crowd, seeing her neighbors' faces, surprise, skepticism, calculation, judgment, all of it. She faced it all and refused to flinch. I choose Blackridge, she continued. I choose the life I helped build here. I choose the man who gave me a home when I had nothing, even though he's made errors in how he protected me. And I'm choosing to claim what's legally mine. That $500 plus interest Rowan mentioned, not as restitution for theft, but as settlement of an accounting oversight. Then I'm choosing to invest every penny back into Blackridge expansion as a formal partner rather than a dependent ward. The declaration landed like a bomb. Lena heard gasps, murmurs, shocked exclamations. She'd just publicly claimed both independence and partnership, admitted to Rowan's mistakes while reframing them as correctable rather than criminal, and announced her intention to tie herself to Blackridge permanently through business investment rather than charity. It was radical, scandalous, absolutely inappropriate by frontier standards for unmarried women. It was also truth, delivered on her terms, in her voice, with her authority. Sutherland studied her for a long moment, then turned to Rowan. Transfer the funds as you described. Full accounting, witnessed by myself and Miss Ashford. If she chooses to reinvest them in your enterprise, that's her business. Our interest is in determining whether Victor Crane lied about his prospects when securing his original loans. He absolutely did, Rowan said flatly. I have the documentation proving every claim he made about accessing Blackridge resources was fabricated. Victor's face went white as he realized the trap closing around him. His creditors weren't interested in Lena's small inheritance. They were interested in the fact that Victor had committed fraud to secure loans he never intended to repay. And now, in front of witnesses, that fraud was being exposed. You can't do this, Victor hissed at Lena. I offered you freedom. You offered me nothing but exploitation dressed up as rescue, Lena said coldly. Just like these men believed your lies about my inheritance. The difference is, I'm not pursuing legal action against you for fraud and attempted manipulation. Consider that my parting gift. Sutherland gestured to his associates. Mr. Crane, we need to discuss the terms of your debt repayment, privately. The look of pure terror on Victor's face, as the creditors surrounded him, was almost satisfying. Almost. Lena found she couldn't take pleasure in his downfall, only relief that it was ending. The crowd began to disperse, conversations erupting as people processed what they'd witnessed. Some looked disappointed. They'd come for drama and gotten boring financial settlement instead. Others looked thoughtful, reconsidering the narratives they'd accepted. A few looked at Lena with something like respect, recognizing courage in her public declaration even if they disagreed with her choices. Jacob Harrison lingered, his young face troubled. Miss Ashford, are you certain about this, about staying at Blackridge, investing your inheritance, tying yourself to Hale's fortunes? I've never been more certain of anything, Lena said, and meant it with her entire being. Jacob nodded slowly, then tipped his hat to both of them and rode away. When they were finally alone, truly alone, the creditors having departed with Victor in custody, the crowd dispersed to spread gossip and speculation. Rowan turned to Lena with an expression of complete devastation. You didn't have to do that, he said hoarsely. Defend me publicly. Sacrifice your reputation. You could have taken that money and left, built a life somewhere the valley's judgment couldn't follow you. I could have, Lena agreed, but that would be running. I'm done running from hard things, Rowan. Done letting fear make my choices. She stepped closer, reached for his hands, felt them shake in her grip. You hurt me. Your silence and control and refusal to trust me with truth hurt me deeply. But I hurt you too, didn't I? By never pushing back, never demanding honesty, never insisting we communicate like equals instead of guardian and ward. That wasn't your fault. It was both our faults. We built something beautiful and poisoned it with fear and silence and misguided protection. Lena's throat tightened with emotion. But I'm not willing to let that poison destroy everything, not when there's still possibility, not when I still love you despite everything we've broken. Rowan stared at her like she'd performed a miracle. You loved me. I've loved you since I was 17 years old, Lena said, the admission both freeing and terrifying. I loved the man who taught me to read land and negotiate deals, loved the partner who made me feel capable and valued. Even loved the distant stranger you became. Because somewhere underneath the ice, I still believed in who you were. Tears spilled down her cheeks. I just couldn't keep loving someone who wouldn't let me in. Couldn't keep existing in silence and hope it meant what I wanted it to mean. Rowan pulled her against him with desperate strength, and Lena felt him shaking, this powerful, controlled man falling apart in her arms. "I'm sorry," he whispered into her hair. "I'm so sorry. For the silence, for the control, for being too afraid to trust you with the truth. For 4 years of wasted time when we could have been—" "We can't change the past," Lena interrupted gently. "But we can choose different for the future. If you're willing, if you can trust me, really trust me, not as a ward or a possession, but as an equal partner with agency and voice and the right to make my own mistakes." Rowan pulled back just enough to meet her eyes, his own red-rimmed and raw. "I'll spend the rest of my life proving I can be worthy of that trust. I swear it, Lena. No more silence. No more decisions made for you. Just honesty and partnership and—" His words cut off as hoofbeats thundered into the yard. They turned to see Marcus galloping toward them, his face frantic. "Boss! Miss Lena! Victor Crane broke away from his creditors. He's armed and heading back this way, and he's not alone. Picked up some drifters from the saloon, promised them money if they help him get what he's owed." Marcus was off his horse before it fully stopped. "They're coming here. Now. And they're talking about taking hostages if they don't get settlement." The moment shattered. Rowan's expression shifted instantly from vulnerable to lethal, every soft edge hardening into warrior focus. "How many?" "6, maybe 7. All armed. They'll be here in minutes." Lena felt ice slide down her spine. This was it, the final escalation, the moment where Victor's desperation transformed into genuine danger. No more narrative battles or reputation wars. Just violence and survival and the brutal reality of frontier justice. "Get inside," Rowan ordered, already moving toward the house. "Both of you, barricade the doors. Don't come out until I give the all clear." "Absolutely not," Lena said, following him into the house. "If this is happening, we face it together. You just promised no more decisions made for me. I'm choosing to stand with you." Rowan wheeled on her, fear and fury warring in his expression. "Lena, this isn't a metaphor or a principle. These are dangerous men coming to do harm. I need you safe, and I need to stop hiding behind your protection." Lena grabbed his arm, forcing him to look at her. "This is my fight too. Victor used me to create this situation. I'm not cowering in a back room while you face the consequences alone." "She's right, boss," Marcus said quietly. "And we could use another gun. Miss Lena's a fair shot." Rowan looked between them, calculation and emotion battling across his face. Lena could see him struggling, every instinct screaming to protect her, to lock her away somewhere safe. But she also saw the moment he remembered his promise, remembered what she'd demanded: trust, partnership, equality even when it was terrifying. "Fine," he said roughly. "But you stay behind cover. You shoot only if you have clear line of sight. And if I tell you to run, I won't," Lena interrupted. "Stop asking me to." His jaw clenched, but he nodded once and turned to Marcus. "Secure the perimeter. I want eyes on every approach. And someone ride to town. Get the sheriff out here. Tell him we've got armed men threatening Blackridge property." "Already sent Johnny," Marcus confirmed. "But sheriff's office is an hour away. We're on our own until then." The window shattered first, glass exploding inward as bullets tore through from outside. Lena hit the floor on instinct, felt Rowan's body cover hers protectively, even as he cursed himself for the impulse. Marcus returned fire from behind an overturned table, and the house erupted into chaos. "Rowan, hail!" Victor's voice carried from outside, drunk and desperate and absolutely unhinged. "Send out the girl. You give me Lena Ashford and enough money to disappear, and nobody gets hurt." "Go to hell, Crane," Rowan shouted back, positioning himself at a window with his rifle. More shots, splintering wood, the acrid smell of gunpowder. Lena crawled to another window, found the pistol Rowan had pressed into her hands earlier, tried to steady her shaking fingers enough to aim. Through the broken glass, she could see men fanning out across the yard, rough types, drifters who'd sell their loyalty for the price of a bottle. And in the center, Victor Crane, his expensive coat filthy and torn, his face twisted with rage and terror in equal measure. "This is your fault," Victor screamed toward the house. "You destroyed everything. You couldn't just let me have her, couldn't just let me save myself. Now you're going to pay. He fired wildly, bullets punching into the house's facade. Rowan returned fire with controlled precision, warning shots, aiming to disarm rather than kill. The difference was stark. Rowan fighting to protect, Victor shooting to harm. "We can end this," Rowan called out during a lull. "You ride away now, Crane, and I won't pursue. You have my word. Just leave." "Your word?" Victor's laugh was unhinged. "Your word is worthless. You bought me off, humiliated me, exposed me to my creditors. They're going to kill me unless I give them something worth the trip. And you know what's worth this trip, Hale. Your ruin, your destruction, watching everything you love burn." The house's front door exploded as someone threw their weight against it. Marcus fired, and a man screamed. The door held, but wouldn't for long. "Back entrance," Rowan said urgently. "Marcus, take Lena and—" "No," Lena said again, and this time her voice was steel. "I told you, together." She fired through her window at a man trying to circle the house, saw him dive for cover. Her hands shook, but her aim held. Years of target practice with Rowan, learning to shoot for survival in harsh country, paying off in ways she'd never imagined. The siege continued, bullets and broken glass, shouted threats, and returned fire. Time lost meaning. Lena focused on breathing, reloading, watching Rowan's back the way he watched hers. Partnership forged in violence and trust, and the absolute refusal to abandon each other no matter how desperate things became. Then she heard the sound that changed everything, the thunder of hoofbeats. Not one rider or two, but dozens. The Valley men, armed and riding hard, converging on Blackridge Hall like an army. Through the smoke and chaos, Lena saw Jacob Harrison at the head of the column, his face set with grim determination. Behind him rode ranchers and farmers, townspeople and ranch hands, not coming to rescue her this time, but coming to defend. "Crane!" Jacob's voice carried over the gunfire. "Stand down! You're surrounded and outnumbered. This ends now." Victor looked around wildly, seeing his hired guns melting away, realizing his position was hopeless. His face contorted with pure hatred as he turned his pistol toward the house one final time. "If I can't have salvation," he screamed, "then neither can you." He fired directly at where Lena stood visible in the window. Time slowed to crystalline clarity. Lena saw the muzzle flash, saw the barrel pointed at her heart, understood with perfect certainty that she was about to die. Then Rowan was there, moving faster than thought, throwing himself in front of her as the bullet found flesh. He went down hard, blood blooming across his shoulder, and Lena's world narrowed to the sight of him falling, his face gray with shock and pain, his hand reaching for her even as he collapsed. "Rowan!" Her scream tore from somewhere primal and terrified. She dropped beside him, pressed her hands against the wound, felt his blood hot and sticky against her palms. "No, no, no, please!" Outside, the Valley men subdued Victor and his remaining accomplices with brutal efficiency. Inside, Lena knelt on the floor, cradling Rowan's head in her lap, watching him struggle to breathe, understanding with absolute clarity what she'd almost lost. "That was stupid," she sobbed, the words half laugh, half accusation. "So stupid! You promised trust and partnership, and then you dove in front of a bullet." "Couldn't let you die," Rowan gasped, his face white with pain. "Couldn't. Not you. Never you." "You don't get to leave me," Lena said fiercely, pressing harder against the wound, trying desperately to stem the bleeding. "Not after everything. Not when we finally told the truth. You don't get to protect me one last time and then die. That's not how this ends." "Lena." His hand found hers, slick with blood, trembling. "I love you. In case I don't get another chance to say it. I love you, have loved you, will love you even if—" "Stop talking like you're dying. You're not dying. I won't let you." Doors burst open. The Valley men poured in, Jacob and Marcus and the town doctor who'd ridden with them, everyone talking at once, hands pulling Rowan away from her to tend his wound properly. Lena felt herself pushed back, watched through tears as they worked on him, barking medical orders she couldn't process through the roaring in her ears. Someone wrapped a blanket around her shoulders. Someone else pressed whiskey into her hands. Lena registered none of it. Her entire focus locked on Rowan's pale face, the too slow rise and fall of his chest, the blood that seemed to be everywhere. Hours passed in disconnected fragments. The doctor working, Rowan unconscious, the sheriff arriving and hauling Victor Crane away in chains, the man still screaming about injustice and conspiracy. The Valley men helping board up windows and clean up the damage, their earlier judgment replaced by grim solidarity in the face of real violence. As dawn broke gray and cold through the shattered windows, the doctor finally emerged from Rowan's room. "He'll live," he said, and Lena felt her knees buckle with relief. Bullet went clean through, missed major arteries. He lost blood, but nothing irreparable. He'll need rest and care, but he'll survive. "Can I see him?" "He's asking for you, has been, every time he surfaces. Won't settle until he knows you're safe." Lena climbed the stairs on shaking legs, pushed open the door to Rowan's room, found him propped against pillows, his shoulder bandaged and his face still too pale, but his eyes open and aware. "You're alive," she said, the words inadequate for the tsunami of emotion flooding through her. "So are you," Rowan answered, his voice rough but steady. "That's all that matters." Lena crossed to his bedside, sat carefully on the edge of the mattress, took his uninjured hand in both of hers. "You took a bullet for me. I'd take 1,000 bullets for you." "That's exactly the protective nonsense I was talking about," she said, but her voice broke on the words. "You can't. We can't build equal partnership if you keep throwing yourself in front of danger to save me." "Then we'll have to compromise. You stop standing in windows during gunfights, and I'll stop diving in front of bullets." A ghost of his old smile touched Rowan's lips. "How's that for negotiation?" "Terrible. Completely one-sided." Lena lifted his hand to her lips, kissed his knuckles, tasted salt and copper and life. "But I'll take it. I'll take you. However you come, whatever mistakes we still have to make together." "Lena Ashford," Rowan said, his eyes bright with something that looked like joy despite the pain. "When I'm healed enough to kneel properly, I'm going to ask you a question. And this time I'm going to do it right, with honesty and trust and no thought for propriety or power dynamics or anything except the simple truth that I love you and want to spend my life proving it." "Yes," Lena said. "I haven't asked yet." "I don't care. Yes, to whatever you're planning to ask. Yes to partnership and honesty and building something better than what we broke. Yes to everything." She leaned down carefully, mindful of his wound, and kissed him with all the accumulated love and fear and relief of the past terrible, transformative hours. Rowan's hand came up to cup her face, his touch gentle despite the tremor of exhaustion, and Lena tasted salt from tears she didn't know she was crying. Outside, the valley stirred to life, news spreading, stories transforming, narratives shifting once again as people processed what had happened. Victor Crane's attack and capture. Rowan Hale taking a bullet to protect Lena Ashford. The Valley men riding to defend Blackridge Hall against outside threats. The story was changing, would keep changing, but for the first time Lena didn't care about the Valley's version of events. She had her own story now, her own truth, her own voice. And she had Rowan, alive and healing, looking at her like she was everything worth surviving for. The rest was just details they'd work out together. But details, Lena discovered over the following days, had teeth. Rowan's recovery was slow and painful, each movement sending fresh agony through his shoulder, despite the laudanum the doctor prescribed. He refused most of it, claiming he needed his mind clear, but Lena saw the way his jaw clenched white when he thought she wasn't looking, saw the sweat that beaded on his forehead during the simple act of sitting up. She appointed herself his warden and nurse in equal measure, ignoring Mrs. Brennan's protests that it wasn't proper for an unmarried woman to tend a man's sick room. Propriety had stopped mattering the moment Rowan took a bullet meant for her. If the Valley wanted to whisper about impropriety, let them whisper. "You're hovering," Rowan said on the third morning, watching her adjust his pillows for the dozenth time. "You're helpless," Lena countered. "Someone needs to keep you from tearing your stitches trying to read land surveys from bed." "I'm not helpless. I'm temporarily inconvenienced." "You can't lift your arm above your waist." "A minor setback." Lena sat on the edge of his bed, took his hand in hers with deliberate gentleness. "Let me help you. Please. After years of you trying to protect me from everything, let me return the favor just this once." Something shifted in Rowan's expression, resistance giving way to reluctant acceptance. This is what partnership looks like, isn't it? Taking turns being strong when the other one can't be. Exactly that. She squeezed his fingers. Now rest. The valley isn't going anywhere, and neither am I. But the valley, as it turned out, had plenty to say. Jacob Harrison arrived that afternoon with news that made Lena's stomach drop. "There's talk of a formal inquiry," he said, standing in Blackridge's parlor with his hat in his hands. "About the shooting, about Victor Crane's claims, about everything." "What kind of inquiry?" Lena demanded. "Territorial magistrate is coming through next month. Word reached him about armed conflict at Blackridge Hall, about allegations of financial impropriety, about a woman living unmarried with a man who holds authority over her circumstances." Jacob's face was pained. "I don't agree with it, Miss Ashford. Neither do most of the men who rode out here to help. But there are still people in the valley who believe Crane's version of events, who think the attack was justified desperation rather than criminal violence. They think Rowan deserved to be shot. They think the situation is more complicated than a clear villain and victim. They want official investigation to determine the truth." Jacob met her eyes directly. "And they want to hear from you, formally, under oath, without any perception that Hale is controlling your testimony." Lena laughed, the sound bitter. "I've already testified publicly. I stood in front of the entire valley and declared my choice to stay at Blackridge. How much clearer can I be? You spoke during a crisis, under circumstances they consider coercive. They want your testimony given to a neutral party, away from Rowan's influence, with legal weight behind it. What they want is to keep questioning my agency until I give them an answer they find acceptable." Lena's voice hardened with anger. "If I defend Rowan, I'm controlled. If I condemn him, I'm finally telling the truth. There's no version of this inquiry where my actual choices matter." "Then make them matter," Jacob said quietly. "Give testimony so compelling they can't dismiss it. Tell your story with enough detail and conviction that even the doubters have to acknowledge your agency." From upstairs came Rowan's voice, hoarse but commanding. "Don't do it, Lena. Don't subject yourself to interrogation to satisfy people who've already made up their minds about us." Lena looked toward the stairs, then back at Jacob. "When does the magistrate arrive?" 4 weeks. He'll hold hearings in town, take testimony from anyone who wants to speak." Jacob shifted his weight. "Victor Crane will testify from jail. So will his creditors. The men who rode with him during the attack. The Valley residents who witnessed various parts of this whole mess. It's going to be thorough, Miss Ashford, and public. Everything that happened between you and Rowan, every decision and mistake, it'll all become part of the official record." "Good," Lena said, the decision crystallizing as she spoke. "Let it be public. Let it be official. I'm tired of fighting narrative through whispers and speculation. If the Valley wants truth, I'll give them truth. All of it, in my own words, under oath, where it becomes permanent record they can't twist or reinterpret." "Lena, no!" Rowan appeared at the top of the stairs, one hand pressed to his bandaged shoulder, his face pale with effort and alarm. "You don't know what they'll ask, how they'll try to discredit you." "Then I'll handle it." She moved to the base of the stairs, looking up at him with absolute conviction. "You took a bullet for me, Rowan. Let me do this for you. For us. Let me fight this battle with the only weapons I have, my voice and my truth." Their eyes locked across the distance, and Lena watched him war with himself again. The instinct to protect versus the promise to trust. She held her breath, waiting to see which would win. Finally, Rowan nodded once, a tight dip of his chin that cost him visible effort. "Together, then. I'll testify too. We'll both tell our truth and let the magistrate decide what it means." "You can't appear before a magistrate in your condition," Jacob protested. The doctor said I'd live. He didn't say I had to stay in bed while my entire life gets judged by people who weren't there." Rowan descended the stairs slowly, each step carefully controlled. "If Lena's testifying, so am I. Non-negotiable." Jacob looked between them and sighed. "You're both impossible. You know that?" "We've been told," Lena said, and felt something like hope kindle in her chest. Maybe they were impossible. Maybe their story was too complicated for frontier society's simple categories. But it was theirs, and she'd be damned if she let anyone else define it. The weeks before the inquiry passed in a strange suspension between crisis and normalcy. Rowan healed slowly, regaining strength and range of motion with stubborn determination. Lena managed Blackridge operations with Marcus's help, making decisions she once would have deferred to Rowan, discovering she was more capable than she'd given herself credit for. They talked, really talked, in the long evenings when work was done and there was nothing left but honesty. About the day Thomas Ashford died, and Rowan had made his promise to protect. About Lena at 17 and the desire that had terrified Rowan into silence. About 4 years of misunderstanding built on fear and good intentions gone catastrophically wrong. I thought if I admitted how I felt, it would destroy everything, Rowan said one night, sitting beside her on the porch where they'd once planned valley expansion together. You were so young, so dependent on me. Any relationship between us would have been fundamentally imbalanced. I convinced myself that silence was the honorable choice. And I thought your silence meant I'd disappointed you somehow, Lena replied, her hand finding his in the darkness. That I'd done something to lose your regard, your friendship, everything we'd built together. I spent 4 years trying to earn back something I never actually lost. We're quite the pair of idiots, aren't we? Spectacular idiots. She leaned her head against his good shoulder. But we're learning. That counts for something. The night before the inquiry, neither of them slept. Lena lay in her room staring at the ceiling, rehearsing testimony in her mind, anticipating questions and objections. Down the hall, she heard Rowan pacing despite the late hour, his footsteps uneven as his healing shoulder protested the movement. Finally, unable to bear the separation, Lena rose and padded down the hallway to his room. She knocked softly, heard his muttered, "Come in," found him sitting at his desk, surrounded by documents and ledgers, 9 years of Blackridge records spread out like evidence at a trial. "Can't sleep either?" she asked. "Keep thinking of things I should have done differently, ways I could have protected you better, or trusted you more, or—" Rowan's voice broke off. "Ways I could have prevented all of this." "You can't rewrite the past." Lena crossed to him, turned his chair so he faced her instead of the damning paper trail of their history. "All we can do is tell the truth about what happened and why, then trust that truth is enough. What if it's not? What if the magistrate decides I exploited you, that our entire relationship was improper from the start? They could force you to leave Blackridge, void any business partnerships, rule that I owe you restitution beyond that original inheritance. Then I'll fight that ruling. I'll appeal to territorial courts, to federal courts if necessary. I'll stand up in every legal forum that exists and declare my choice to be here until someone finally listens." She cupped his face in her hands, made him look at her. "I'm not a victim, Rowan. I'm not a woman who needs rescuing from my own decisions, and I won't let any magistrate or inquiry tell me otherwise." His arms came around her waist, careful of his injury, pulling her close. "I don't deserve you." "Probably not, but you're stuck with me anyway." They stayed like that for a long time, drawing strength from proximity, until exhaustion finally claimed them both and they dozed in the chair together, still holding on. The inquiry convened in the town's largest building, the community hall that served as church on Sundays and courtroom when needed. By the time Lena and Rowan arrived, the space was packed. Every seat filled, people standing along the walls, faces ranging from sympathetic to hostile to simply curious. Magistrate Theodore Whitmore sat at a raised table at the front of the room, a severe man in his 60s with steel-gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. He traveled from the territorial capital specifically for this hearing, bringing with him the weight of official authority and legal precedent. "This inquiry," he began without preamble, "has been convened to investigate allegations of financial impropriety, unlawful coercion, and improper relationships involving Rowan Hale and his ward, Lena Ashford. We will hear testimony from all relevant parties, examine evidence, and determine whether any laws have been violated or whether civil remedies are warranted." Victor Crane testified first, brought from his jail cell in shackles, still trying to spin his story into something resembling victimhood. He painted himself as a concerned suitor who'd discovered terrible exploitation and tried to rescue Lena from Rowan's control, only to be threatened and driven away. "I offered her marriage, freedom, a chance at real life," Victor said, his voice carrying that practiced sincerity that had once fooled so many. Hale couldn't stand losing his asset, his unpaid consultant, so he fabricated stories about my debts, paid off my creditors to make me look desperate, then used his influence to turn the valley against me. Is that why you attacked Blackridge Hall with armed men? The magistrate asked dryly. I was defending myself, trying to collect what was legally owed to Miss Ashford before Hale could hide or transfer those funds. The violence was his doing, not mine. Lena listened to Victor's testimony with cold detachment, recognizing the manipulation even as she wondered how many in the audience were buying it. Some faces showed skepticism, but others nodded along, finding Victor's version more comfortable than the complicated truth. The creditors testified next, confirming Victor's debts, but also acknowledging that Rowan had settled those debts before the attack, which somewhat undermined Victor's claims of desperate self-defense. Then came the men who'd ridden with Victor, drifters who'd been promised payment to help recover stolen property, who admitted they'd been drunk and poorly informed about what they were actually attacking. By midday, the magistrate called for a recess. Lena used the break to step outside, breathing fresh air and trying to settle her nerves. Jacob Harrison found her there, along with several other Valley residents who'd defended Blackridge during the attack. You're doing well, Jacob said quietly. Crane's story isn't holding up under scrutiny. The magistrate looks skeptical. Skeptical of Victor doesn't mean convinced by me, Lena replied. The real test comes when I testify. Then tell them what you told us. About choosing Blackridge, about building this life deliberately, about making your own decisions. Jacob's expression was earnest. I didn't believe it at first, I'll admit. Thought you were too young, too dependent, too controlled to have real agency. But watching you these past weeks, seeing how you've run the estate while Hale recovered, hearing how you speak about your choices, I believe it now. And I'll testify to that change in my own perception if it helps. Lena felt her throat tighten with gratitude. Thank you, truly. When testimony resumed, the magistrate called Rowan to the stand. He walked to the front of the room with careful dignity, his injury still visible in the way he held his shoulder, but his bearing proud and unbroken. He placed his hand on the Bible. Lena noticed he didn't flinch at that, despite his private skepticism about organized religion, and swore to tell the truth. Mr. Hale, the magistrate began, please describe the circumstances under which Miss Ashford came to live at Blackridge Hall. Oh, Rowan's testimony was methodical, precise, laying out facts without embellishment. Thomas Ashford's death. The promise Rowan had made to provide for his surveyor's orphaned daughter. The decision to bring Lena into his household rather than send her to distant relatives or institutional care. Why not seek a more conventional arrangement, the magistrate asked. A girls' school, perhaps? Or placement with a family that included a wife who could serve as proper chaperone? Because conventional arrangements would have taken Lena away from the valley, from her father's land, from everything familiar. She'd already lost her parent. I didn't want to compound that trauma by stripping away her home, too. Rowan's voice remained steady. And yes, my household lacked a wife. But it had Mrs. Brennan, who served as chaperone and maternal figure. It had structure, education, safety. It had me, committed to honoring Thomas's memory by raising his daughter well. And when did your feelings toward Miss Ashford change from paternal to romantic? The question hung in the air like a sword. Lena watched Rowan's face, saw him choose honesty over self-protection. When she was 17, he said quietly, I'd been teaching her the business, bringing her along on surveys and negotiations. One day I looked at her and saw not the child I'd taken in, but a woman, brilliant, capable, beautiful. The shift in my perception terrified me. Why terrified? Because she was my ward, my responsibility. Any romantic feelings I harbored felt like a betrayal of the trust her father had placed in me, a violation of the power dynamic between us. Rowan's hands clenched on the arms of his chair. So I did what I thought was honorable. I distanced myself, stopped our close collaboration, ended our partnership, treated her with formal courtesy rather than warmth. I believed I was protecting her from inappropriate advances from a man who held authority over her circumstances. And did you ever express these romantic feelings to Miss Ashford during the years of her minority? Never. I gave her no indication of my emotions beyond increased distance. So, from her perspective, you simply withdrew affection and partnership without explanation? Rowan's face tightened with pain. Yes. From her perspective, I imagine it felt like rejection without cause. I realize now how cruel that was, how it damaged her in ways I never intended. But at the time, I convinced myself that silence was the honorable path. The magistrate made notes, his expression unreadable. And the financial arrangements? Miss Ashford worked in your business without formal compensation? She lived in my household with all expenses covered. I considered that compensation for any assistance she provided, which I initially framed as education rather than employment. Rowan pulled out ledgers from the stack beside his chair. But you're right that it was unconventional. I've prepared a full accounting of her contributions to Blackridge operations over 9 years, with fair market value assigned to each task. Along with the inheritance from her father's final surveys, I'm prepared to provide Miss Ashford with substantial back payment if the inquiry deems it appropriate. How substantial? $3,000 plus the $500 from her father's estate, enough to establish complete independence if she chooses. A murmur rippled through the audience. That kind of money was a fortune in frontier territory, enough to purchase property, start a business, live comfortably for years. The magistrate's eyebrows rose. You're offering this voluntarily? I'm acknowledging what's fair. Lena Ashford built Blackridge into what it is today as much as I did. She deserves compensation reflecting that reality, regardless of what this inquiry determines about the legality of our arrangements. More note-taking, more questions about specific business decisions, about Lena's role in Valley consolidation, about the nature of their working relationship. Rowan answered everything with unflinching honesty, including his mistakes, the control he'd exerted, the decisions he'd made without consulting her, the ways his protective impulses had crossed into restriction of her freedom. And now? The magistrate asked. What is the nature of your relationship with Miss Ashford currently? I love her, Rowan said simply. I have loved her for years, though I failed to express it honestly until recent crisis forced the truth into the open. She deserves better than I've given her, better than silence and control and misguided protection. I'm trying to learn how to be a true partner rather than a guardian, how to trust her with decisions rather than make them for her. It's difficult. I'm not always successful, but I'm committed to that growth because Lena Ashford is the most remarkable woman I've ever known, and she deserves to be treated as such. The room fell silent. Lena felt tears burning behind her eyes, moved by the raw honesty in Rowan's testimony, by his willingness to expose every mistake and failure in service of truth. Thank you, Mr. Hale, the magistrate said. You may step down. We'll hear now from Miss Ashford herself. Lena rose on shaking legs and made her way to the front of the room. Every eye tracked her movement. She could feel the weight of their judgment, their curiosity, their preconceptions about who she was and what her testimony would reveal. She placed her hand on the Bible and swore to tell the truth, then met the magistrate's gaze directly. Miss Ashford, he began, I need you to understand something before we proceed. This testimony is your opportunity to speak freely, without fear of repercussion from Mr. Hale or anyone else. If you have been coerced, exploited, or controlled in any way, this is your chance to say so. I have the authority to remove you from Blackridge Hall immediately, to assign you an independent advocate, to pursue criminal charges if warranted. Do you understand? I understand, Lena said clearly. Then let's begin. In your own words, describe your experience at Blackridge Hall over the past 9 years. Lena drew a breath, organized her thoughts, and began to speak. She told them about the day her father died, about the terror of sudden orphanhood in unforgiving country, told them about Rowan's promise, not just to provide shelter, but to give her purpose and education, told them about learning the business, about discovering she had aptitude for strategy and negotiation, about the partnership that had developed between her and Rowan before he'd withdrawn. He's right that he distanced himself when I was 17, Lena said. Right that from my perspective it felt like rejection. I spent years trying to understand what I'd done wrong, trying to earn back his regard. It was painful, confusing. It damaged my sense of worth and belonging. So you confirm he hurt you through his actions. I confirm he made mistakes that caused me pain, but I don't confirm that those mistakes constitute exploitation or abuse. Lena leaned forward, needing them to understand the distinction. Rowan was terrified of his own feelings. He was trying to do the right thing in impossible circumstances, trying to honor his responsibility to me while managing inappropriate desire. He chose silence and distance, which were the wrong choices, but they came from genuine ethical concern, not from malice or desire to control. How can you be certain of his motivations? Because I know him. Because I've worked beside him for 9 years and seen how he operates, how he thinks, what drives his decisions. Rowan Hale is many things: stubborn, protective to a fault, sometimes arrogant in his certainty. But he's not cruel, he's not manipulative. He's a man who was handed enormous responsibility very young and did his best with it, which included making terrible mistakes while trying to be honorable. The magistrate studied her carefully. You speak of him with great affection. I love him. I've loved him since I was 17 years old, which I realize complicates the power dynamic even further. But that love was my choice, my feeling, independent of anything Rowan did to encourage it. If anything, his distance should have killed whatever affection I felt. Instead, it just made me more determined to understand him, to prove myself worthy of the partnership we'd lost. And the financial arrangements? The fact that you worked without compensation while living under his authority and dependent on his goodwill for shelter and sustenance. Did you understand you were being undervalued? I understood I was being provided for completely. Housing, food, clothing, education, social position. At the time, that felt like fair exchange for the work I contributed. Looking back now with more experience, I can see the arrangement was imbalanced. I should have negotiated formal employment terms, insisted on compensation beyond room and board. But I was young and inexperienced, and Rowan was operating from a guardian's mindset rather than an employer's. We both made assumptions that turned out to be problematic. Yet you defend these problematic assumptions. I explain them. There's a difference. Lena's voice strengthened. I'm not claiming everything about my situation was perfect or even acceptable by conventional standards. I'm claiming that my agency existed throughout, that my choices mattered, that I'm not a victim who needs rescuing from my own decisions. The magistrate leaned back in his chair. You're aware that Mr. Hale has offered you substantial financial compensation, enough to leave Blackridge and establish complete independence if you chose. I'm aware. And what will you do with that money? Invest every penny back into Blackridge expansion as a formal business partner with equity stake in the operation. Lena smiled slightly, which I realize sounds like I'm still under Rowan's control. But it's my choice, made freely, based on my assessment that Blackridge is the best investment opportunity in 3 territories, and Rowan Hale is the best partner I could ask for in developing it. Even after everything, the distance, the control, the mistakes you've acknowledged, especially after everything, because we've learned from those mistakes, because we've moved from silence to honesty, from assumed authority to negotiated partnership. We're not perfect. We're still figuring out how to balance care with autonomy, how to protect each other without restricting each other's freedom. But we're doing it together, with full transparency, and that matters more than the errors we made getting here. The magistrate made extensive notes, then looked up with something like respect in his eyes. Miss Ashford, I'm going to ask you a direct question, and I need you to answer with complete honesty. Has Mr. Hale ever physically harmed you, threatened you, or coerced you in any way? Never. Not once in 9 years. Has he ever restricted your movement, prevented you from leaving Blackridge, or denied you access to resources you requested? No. I've always been free to ride wherever I chose, to correspond with whomever I wished, to use Blackridge resources for personal purposes. Did he interfere with your engagement to Victor Crane? He exposed Victor's debts and ulterior motives, then paid those debts to remove Victor's desperation as a variable. I ended the engagement myself after learning the truth about Victor's character and intentions. And you're certain that decision was yours alone? Completely certain. Rowan tried to influence the decision by presenting information. I made the final choice based on my own assessment of that information and my own values. The magistrate nodded slowly. Thank you, Miss Ashford. That's very clear. He glanced at his notes, then at the assembled crowd. I have no further questions at this time. Does anyone else wish to offer testimony relevant to this inquiry? Jacob Harrison stood. I'd like to speak, if permitted. Proceed. Jacob moved to the front of the room, his young face serious. I was one of the men who rode to Blackridge Hall, believing we were rescuing Miss Ashford from exploitation. I was convinced by Victor Crane's story, convinced that a young woman living under a powerful man's authority couldn't possibly have real agency or choice. I'm here to say I was wrong. He described the week since the attack, watching Lena manage Blackridge operations, seeing her make complex business decisions, observing the way she and Rowan interacted as clear equals despite the history between them. She's not a victim, Jacob concluded. She's one of the most capable people in this valley, and I was doing her a disservice by assuming she needed rescue from her own choices. Whatever arrangement exists between her and Mr. Hale, it's theirs to define. The rest of us should respect that rather than imposing our own interpretations of what's proper or acceptable. Others testified after Jacob. Mrs. Brennan defending Rowan's character, Marcus describing Lena's business acumen, even some of the Valley residents who'd initially supported Victor admitting they'd been swayed by his manipulation and now recognized the situation was more complex than they'd believed. Finally, as afternoon shadows lengthened through the windows, the magistrate called for final arguments. This inquiry was convened to determine whether laws were violated or remedies warranted, he said. Having heard extensive testimony, I'm prepared to make preliminary findings. The room held its collective breath. First, regarding financial impropriety. While the employment arrangements between Mr. Hale and Miss Ashford were unconventional and arguably exploitative in their informality, I find no evidence of criminal intent. Mr. Hale provided comprehensive support, while Miss Ashford contributed labor, operating under a guardian ward framework that, while problematic, was not illegal. His voluntary offer of back payment demonstrates good faith effort to correct past imbalance. Lena felt Rowan's hand find hers beneath the table, squeeze gently. Second, regarding coercion and control, I find no evidence that Miss Ashford was physically restrained, threatened, or prevented from exercising her own judgment. While Mr. Hale's protective instincts sometimes manifested as excessive control, and while the power imbalance inherent in their relationship created problematic dynamics, Miss Ashford has consistently demonstrated agency and independence in her testimony and actions. She is not a victim requiring state intervention. Relief flooded through Lena like a physical wave. However, the magistrate continued, and the room tensed again, I am concerned about the propriety of an unmarried woman continuing to reside in Mr. Hale's household, given the romantic relationship that now exists between them. While I accept Miss Ashford's testimony about her agency and choices, I'm mindful of how such an arrangement appears to the community and what precedent it might set. Rowan stood abruptly. Then I'll eliminate that concern. Magistrate Whitmore, with your permission and in the presence of these witnesses, I'd like to ask Miss Ashford a question. The magistrate's eyebrows rose, but he gestured assent. Rowan turned to Lena, and despite his injury, despite the audience, despite everything, he lowered himself carefully to one knee. Lena Ashford, he said, his voice carrying clearly through the silent room, I'm asking you this in the least romantic setting imaginable, surrounded by legal proceedings and community judgment, because I want every witness here to understand that what I'm offering is real and freely chosen on both sides. He pulled a ring from his pocket, simple gold with a small diamond, nothing ostentatious, but clearly chosen with care. I love you. I have loved you badly, loved you silently, loved you in ways that hurt us both. But I'm learning to love you better, honestly, openly, as an equal partner in everything we build together. Will you marry me? Not because it's proper or convenient or expected, but because I want to spend the rest of my life proving I can be worthy of your trust and partnership? Lena felt tears streaming down her face, felt the entire room holding its breath, felt the weight of 9 years of complicated history pressing down on this single moment of choice. Yes, she said clearly, her voice strong despite the tears. Yes, I'll marry you, not because the magistrate thinks it's proper, not because the Valley expects it, but because I choose you, Rowan Hale, mistakes and all, learning and growing, building something better than what we broke. I choose you freely and completely. Rowan slid the ring onto her finger, then rose with visible effort and pulled her into an embrace that made his shoulder protest, but clearly didn't care. The room erupted in noise, some applause, some disapproving mutters, some shocked exclamations. But Lena heard none of it over the pounding of her own heart. When they finally pulled apart, the magistrate was actually smiling, a small, austere expression that transformed his severe features into something almost warm. Well then, he said dryly, I believe that addresses my concerns about propriety. This inquiry is concluded. I find no criminal activity occurred, no civil remedies are warranted beyond the financial settlement Mr. Hale has already offered. And Miss Ashford, soon to be Mrs. Hale apparently, has demonstrated sufficient agency and independence to make her own choices about her future. This matter is closed. He brought down his gavel with a definitive crack, and just like that, it was over. The crowd surged forward, some to congratulate, some to object, some simply to process what they'd witnessed. Lena and Rowan stood at the center of the chaos, hands clasped, facing it together. Jacob Harrison pushed through the crowd to shake Rowan's hand. "Congratulations to both of you. I'm glad the truth won out." "Thank you," Rowan said simply, "and thank you for your testimony. It made a difference." "Just told the truth as I saw it," Jacob grinned. "Though I have to say, that was the least romantic proposal I've ever witnessed. Couldn't you have waited until after the legal proceedings?" "I could have," Rowan admitted, his arm around Lena's waist. "But I was tired of waiting, tired of letting fear or propriety or other people's opinions dictate when and how I could claim what mattered most." Lena leaned into him, felt his solid warmth, his steady heartbeat. "We're done waiting," she agreed. "Done letting anyone but us define what our relationship means or how we build our life together." Mrs. Brennan appeared with tears streaming down her weathered face, pulling Lena into a fierce hug. "About time," she muttered. "About damn time. I've been waiting 9 years for that boy to find his courage." "It took a bullet and a public inquiry," Lena said, laughing through her own tears. "But we got there eventually." They made their way out of the community hall into evening air that tasted like freedom and new beginnings. The valley spread around them, mountains touched with alpenglow, grasslands turning gold in the fading light, Blackridge Hall visible in the distance like a promise. "So," Rowan said as they walked toward their horses, "we're engaged." "Apparently so." "The valley knows. The magistrate knows. There's no taking it back even if we wanted to." "Do you want to?" Lena asked, sudden fear tightening her chest. Rowan stopped walking, turned her to face him, cupped her face in his hands with infinite gentleness. "I want nothing more than to marry you, Lena Ashford, to build a life together based on honesty and partnership and mutual respect, to prove every day that I've learned from my mistakes and I'm worthy of the trust you're placing in me." He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, finally her lips with tender reverence. "I just wish I'd asked you somewhere more romantic than a courtroom." "I don't," Lena said fiercely. "I'm glad you asked me there, in front of everyone, with legal weight and public witness. Now no one can ever claim you coerced me or that I didn't choose freely. Our engagement is part of the official record, like our testimony, like our truth." They rode home together as the sun set over Blackridge Valley, painting the sky in shades of orange and crimson and gold. The same land that had witnessed Lena's arrival as a frightened 12-year-old orphan now saw her return as a woman engaged to the man she loved, with agency and voice and the power to shape her own destiny. It wasn't a perfect ending. There would still be whispers, still be judgment from those who found their story too unconventional or their choices too bold. But Lena found she no longer cared about perfect. She cared about truth, about partnership, about building something honest and strong with the man beside her, learning and growing and making new mistakes they'd face together. And for the first time in 9 years, she felt completely, gloriously free to do exactly that. And for the first time in 9 years, she felt completely, gloriously free to do exactly that. The wedding preparations began the next morning, whether they were ready or not. Mrs. Brennan descended on them at breakfast with lists and plans and opinions about everything from flowers to menu to guest accommodations. 6 weeks, she announced, setting down a cup of coffee with enough force to make it slosh. "That's how long you have to plan a proper valley wedding. Any shorter and people will talk. Any longer and I'll lose my mind waiting." "People are already talking," Lena pointed out, buttering toast with deliberate calm. "I don't think the timeline will change that." "Then let them talk about how beautiful the ceremony was instead of speculating about scandal." Mrs. Brennan pulled out a chair uninvited, spreading her papers across the breakfast table. "Now, the guest list. Obviously the Harrisons, the Mackenzies, the Stevenson family." "Mrs. Brennan," Rowan interrupted gently, his hand finding Lena's under the table. "Perhaps we should let the bride and groom decide what kind of wedding they want before we start inviting the entire territory." The housekeeper looked between them, reading something in their expressions that made her own soften. "You want something small," We want something honest, Lena said. Something that reflects who we actually are rather than who the Valley expects us to be. Which means, Rowan and Lena exchanged glances, that wordless communication they'd developed over years of partnership finally operating freely again. Which means, Rowan said slowly, we get married here at Blackridge with the people who actually matter to us present. Not a social spectacle. Not a Valley event designed to prove propriety. Just us, choosing each other, witnessed by those who understand what that choice means. Mrs. Brennan's eyes misted. That's the most sensible thing I've heard either of you say in 9 years. She gathered her papers with brisk efficiency. Small wedding it is. I'll handle the practical arrangements. You two focus on not killing each other before the ceremony. She swept out, leaving them alone with cooling coffee and the weight of impending permanent commitment. Having second thoughts? Lena asked, only half joking. Thousands of them. All variations on how did I get this lucky and what if I mess this up again? Rowan turned her hand over in his, traced the line of her palm with his thumb. You? Terrified, excited, certain this is right, and equally certain I have no idea what I'm doing. She laughed shakily. Is that normal for engaged people? I have no idea. Never been engaged before. His smile was crooked, vulnerable in a way that still caught her off guard. We'll figure it out together, like everything else. The weeks that followed were strange and wonderful in equal measure. Word of their engagement spread through the valley like wildfire, generating reactions ranging from genuine happiness to scandalized disapproval to cynical speculation about shotgun weddings and forced propriety. Lena discovered she cared remarkably little about the valley's opinions. She'd spent 9 years seeking approval, trying to fit into boxes labeled acceptable and proper and grateful ward. She was done with boxes, done performing for an audience that would never be satisfied no matter how perfectly she played her assigned role. Instead, she focused on the practical work of transforming her relationship with Rowan from complicated history into functional partnership. They spent long hours with the territory's lawyer, drafting contracts that formalized her equity stake in Blackridge operations, establishing her legal right to make decisions and access resources independent of marriage. You don't have to do this, the lawyer said, reviewing the documents with obvious confusion. Once you're married, your property becomes his property under territorial law. These protections are unnecessary. They're absolutely necessary, Lena corrected firmly. I'm not entering this marriage as a dependent ward being absorbed into my husband's holdings. I'm entering as an equal partner with clearly defined rights and responsibilities. The contracts stay. The lawyer looked to Rowan for confirmation, clearly expecting the groom to object to such unusual arrangements. Instead, Rowan just smiled. You heard the lady. Draft the contracts exactly as she specified. Walking out of the lawyer's office with signed agreements in hand, Lena felt something shift fundamentally in her perception of herself. She wasn't Rowan's ward anymore. Wasn't his charity case or his dependent or his responsibility. She was his business partner, his equal, his chosen companion in building something neither of them could create alone. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. The wedding invitations went to precisely 20 people, the Valley residents who genuinely supported them, who'd ridden to Blackridge's defense, who testified honestly during the inquiry. Jacob Harrison and his parents, Marcus and the other ranch hands who'd worked alongside Lena for years, Mrs. Mackenzie from the boarding house, the doctor who'd saved Rowan's life, a few others who'd proven themselves friends rather than gossips. Conspicuously absent were the social climbers, the judgment dealers, the people who'd supported Victor Crane's narrative or demanded Lena's rescue from her own choices. The Valley noticed. Opinions were expressed. Lena ignored them all. You're burning bridges, Rowan observed one evening as they reviewed final preparations. Some of these families have influence you might want to cultivate for future business dealings. Then I'll cultivate it through fair dealing and quality work, not through obligatory social ties. Lena set down her pen, met his eyes directly. I spent too many years trying to earn approval from people who were determined to withhold it. I'm done with that game. Our wedding celebrates the people who stood with us, not the people who judged us. I love you, Rowan said suddenly, intensely, pulling her into his arms with careful regard for his still healing shoulder. Have I mentioned that recently? Not in the last hour. I was starting to worry. He kissed her deeply, thoroughly. The kind of kiss that made her forget about guest lists and seating arrangements and everything except the feel of his mouth on hers, the strength of his arms, the solid reality of choosing and being chosen. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Rowan rested his forehead against hers. 6 weeks feels impossibly long, and impossibly short. Lena's fingers traced the line of his jaw. Part of me wants to run down to the magistrate tomorrow and be done with waiting. Another part wants to freeze this moment, the anticipation, the promise, the space between deciding and committing where everything still feels possible. Everything is possible, Rowan said softly. That's what I'm learning from you. That we don't have to accept the limitations other people place on us. We can define our own terms, build our own life, create something that exists nowhere except in the space we make for it. 3 weeks before the wedding, Victor Crane's trial concluded. The territorial court found him guilty of fraud, attempted extortion, and leading an armed assault on private property. The sentence was harsh, 10 years in territorial prison with additional civil judgments requiring restitution to both his creditors and to Blackridge for damages incurred during the attack. Lena attended the sentencing, sitting in the courtroom gallery beside Rowan, watching Victor's face as the judge delivered the verdict. She expected to feel satisfaction, vindication, maybe even pity. Instead, she felt only a vast emptiness where anger used to live. Victor had tried to use her, yes, had manipulated and lied and ultimately resorted to violence when his schemes failed. But he'd also been a desperate man trapped by debts and poor choices, lashing out because he saw no other path to survival. She couldn't forgive the violence or excuse the manipulation, but she could let go of the fury, release the grudge, move forward without carrying his poison in her heart. "Are you all right?" Rowan asked quietly as they left the courthouse. "I'm free," Lena said, and meant it in ways that went far beyond Victor's imprisonment. Free of anger, free of the need for revenge, free to build our life without his shadow darkening it. That's all I wanted from this trial, closure, not victory. "You're a better person than I am. I wanted victory." "You wanted to protect me. It's not the same thing." She took his hand, laced their fingers together. "But I don't need protection from Victor Crane anymore. He's defeated himself more thoroughly than any revenge we could design. Now we just move forward." They rode home through autumn landscape, turning toward winter, the first snow already dusting the higher peaks, the aspens bare of leaves, the air carrying that peculiar clarity that came with cold. Blackridge Valley spread around them in all its harsh beauty, the land they'd both fought for and nearly lost, the home they'd built together through pain and mistakes and hard-won understanding. "I have something to show you," Rowan said as they approached the house. Instead of heading to the stables, he guided their horses toward the eastern ridge, the high ground overlooking the valley floor. They crested the rise, and Lena gasped. Someone had built a structure there, not large, but beautifully crafted, a small cabin made of local stone and timber with windows facing the sunrise and the valley beyond. Smoke curled from its chimney, suggesting a fire already burning inside. "What is this?" Lena breathed. "Your wedding gift." "Well, our wedding gift." Rowan dismounted, helped her down, his hands lingering at her waist. "I know we're living at Blackridge Hall, and that will continue to be our primary residence. But I also know you need space that's entirely yours, not inherited from my family, not tainted by the years you spent there as a ward. So I had this built, our place, where we start fresh." He led her inside, and Lena found herself in a single large room that managed to be both rustic and elegant. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, already crackling with warmth. Windows on 3 sides flooded the space with light. Simple furniture, a bed, a desk, chairs built for comfort rather than show, occupied the corners, leaving the center open and airy. But it was the details that made her throat tighten with emotion. Books she'd mentioned loving lined a shelf near the desk. Maps of the valley covered one wall, including surveys her father had completed before his death. A painting of the view from this exact spot hung above the fireplace. The valley at sunrise, light breaking over the mountains in shades of gold and crimson. "Rowan," she whispered, unable to say more. "I wanted you to have a place that was just ours," he said quietly, coming up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. No history except what we make here. No ghosts of guardianship or control or mistakes. Just us, building something new. Lena turned in his arms, saw the vulnerability in his face, the fear that maybe he'd overstepped again, assumed too much, made decisions without proper consultation. The old Rowan would have presented this as a fait accompli. This Rowan waited for her response, genuinely uncertain, giving her space to reject or accept on her own terms. "It's perfect," she said, and watched relief flood his features. "Absolutely perfect. Though we should probably establish some ground rules about you building structures without telling me." "You're right. I'm sorry. I wanted it to be a surprise, but I should have consulted you on the design, the location, the—" She stopped his anxious spiral with a kiss. "I'm teasing you. Well, mostly teasing. This is beautiful and thoughtful and exactly what I didn't know I needed. Thank you." They christened the cabin that afternoon in front of the fire, learning each other with hands and mouths and whispered confessions, finally allowing desire that had been suppressed for years to burn free and wild. It was clumsy and perfect, and nothing like the cold distance that had defined their relationship for so long. Afterward, wrapped in blankets and each other, Lena felt Rowan's fingers tracing idle patterns on her shoulder. "Tell me something," he said quietly. "Something I don't know. Something true." She thought for a moment, then said, "I used to imagine this. Being with you like this. I'd lie in my bed at Blackridge Hall and picture what it would be like if you'd chosen me instead of pushing me away. It felt like fantasy, impossible as wanting the moon. I never really believed it would happen." "I imagined it too," Rowan admitted, his voice rough with emotion. "Imagined it and hated myself for it, convinced I was betraying your trust just by wanting you. The discipline it took to maintain distance, when all I wanted was to pull you close, it nearly broke me, Lena. Every day was a battle between what I felt and what I believed was right. Was it worth it, the 4 years of fighting yourself? No. It was wasted time built on faulty assumptions. If I could go back, I'd choose honesty from the start. Tell you how I felt. Trust you to navigate the complexity with me instead of making decisions for you." He kissed her temple. "But I can't go back. I can only move forward and do better." "Then that's what we'll do. Both of us. No more hiding, no more silence, no more assuming we know what's best for each other without communication. Deal." They stayed in the cabin until sunset, talking and touching and mapping the geography of this new relationship they were building. When they finally rode back to Blackridge Hall, Lena felt fundamentally changed, not by the physical intimacy, though that mattered, but by the emotional honesty that had accompanied it. They were really doing this, building a life together, a partnership, a marriage based on truth rather than obligation or silence or fear. The night before the wedding, Lena couldn't sleep. She stood on the porch of Blackridge Hall watching stars wheel overhead, wrapped in a shawl against the autumn chill, her mind racing through everything that had led to this moment. 9 years since her father's death. 9 years of survival and growth and painful transformation. 9 years of loving a man who'd loved her back in the most destructive way possible before finally learning how to love her honestly. Tomorrow, she'd marry him. Tomorrow, she'd stand before witnesses and claim him publicly, permanently, irrevocably. The thought terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. Couldn't sleep either? She turned to find Rowan emerging from the house, his own coat thrown hastily over sleep clothes, his hair disheveled. He looked young and uncertain and absolutely beautiful in the starlight. "Too many thoughts," Lena admitted. "Too much emotion. My brain won't settle." "Mine either." He joined her at the railing, careful to leave space between them, honoring the tradition that they shouldn't see each other before the ceremony, even though they'd already broken every other tradition that existed. "I keep thinking about your father, about the promise I made the day he died, to take care of you. I wonder if he'd think I've kept that promise, or broken it spectacularly." "I think he'd be proud," Lena said softly. "Not of the mistakes. He'd probably have some words about those. But of the fact that you tried so hard to honor his memory, even when trying led you astray. And of the fact that we found our way back to each other, despite everything." "You think he'd approve?" "Of us marrying. I think he'd recognize that you've been my family since I was 12 years old, that you gave me home and purpose and identity when I had nothing, that loving you was inevitable given how deeply you've shaped who I am. She reached for his hand, felt his fingers close around hers. And I think he'd approve of me having agency in that choice rather than being a passive recipient of male decision-making. My father believed women were capable of extraordinary things. He raised me to believe that too. You've honored that belief by learning to treat me as an equal. Rowan pulled her close, buried his face in her hair. I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of you. You already are. You just have to believe it. They stood together in the darkness, holding each other, waiting for dawn and the day that would change everything. The wedding itself was small and simple and absolutely perfect. They'd chosen to hold it in the morning in the cabin Rowan had built, with sunrise painting the valley in shades of gold as their backdrop. Mrs. Brennan had filled the space with wildflowers, late-blooming asters and goldenrod, hardy mountain plants that survived early frost. The guests sat in a semicircle, 20 people who genuinely cared about them, who'd stood with them through crisis and judgment. Lena wore a dress of deep blue silk, simple and elegant, with her mother's silver pendant at her throat. No white gown, no veil, no pretense that she was some virginal innocent being delivered into a man's keeping. She was a woman making a choice, claiming a partner, entering marriage with eyes wide open and agency intact. Rowan stood at the front of the room looking nervous and awed in equal measure, his formal clothes sitting strangely on a man more comfortable in work clothes and trail dust. When Lena walked down the short aisle, no one giving her away because she belonged to herself, his face transformed with such naked joy that she felt her own tears threaten. The ceremony was brief. No lengthy sermons, no lectures about wifely duties or masculine authority, just simple vows exchanged in their own words, promises made freely and witnessed publicly. I promise to trust you, Rowan said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. To communicate honestly even when it's difficult. To treat you as an equal partner in everything we build together. To never again make decisions for you out of misguided protection. To love you with transparency and respect and daily effort to be better than I was yesterday. Lena's throat tightened, hearing him strip away every defense and offer himself completely. When it was her turn, she spoke the truth she'd been carrying for years. I promise to challenge you when you need challenging, support you when you need support, and trust you enough to tell you which I think you need. I promise to build this partnership with honesty, to demand the respect I deserve, to never settle for silence when truth is necessary. I promise to love you fiercely and freely, choosing you every day not from obligation, but from genuine desire to share my life with you. They exchanged rings, simple gold bands engraved with coordinates, the exact latitude and longitude of this cabin, this spot where they were making new beginning. Then the officiant pronounced them married, and Rowan kissed her with such tender reverence that the small audience erupted in genuine applause. The celebration afterward was intimate and joyful. Mrs. Brennan had prepared a feast that filled the cabin with the scent of roasted meat and fresh bread and autumn vegetables. Wine flowed freely, and toasts ranged from heartfelt to ribald to surprisingly insightful. Jacob Harrison stood to speak, his young face serious. I'm going to be honest. When I first heard about this marriage, I thought it was scandal dressed up as propriety. But watching Rowan and Lena together these past weeks, I've learned something important. Love doesn't always look like we expect it to. Sometimes it's messy and complicated and built on foundations that seem questionable from the outside. But if it's honest and equal and freely chosen, it's more real than any conventional arrangement that looks perfect but feels hollow. He raised his glass. To Rowan and Lena, may your unconventional love teach the rest of us that there are many paths to happiness, and the right one is whichever you choose with eyes open and heart engaged. The toast was drunk with enthusiasm, and Lena felt something in her chest expand with gratitude. This was what mattered. Not the Valley's approval or society's validation, but the genuine support of people who understood that their relationship was theirs to define. As afternoon faded toward evening, guests began departing with hugs and congratulations and promises to visit soon. Finally, only Mrs. Brennan remained, efficiently clearing dishes and wrapping leftovers. Leave it, Lena said gently. We'll handle cleanup tomorrow. You've done more than enough. The housekeeper's eyes misted. I've been waiting 9 years for this day. 9 years of watching you two dance around each other, hurt each other, nearly destroy each other trying so hard to do the right thing. I'm just grateful you finally figured it out. She pulled Lena into a fierce hug, then did the same to Rowan. Be good to each other. Be honest with each other. And for heaven's sake, don't wait another 9 years to tell each other what you need. We won't, they promised in unison, and Mrs. Brennan left with a satisfied smile. Alone finally, Lena and Rowan stood in the cabin they'd filled with friends and promises, looking at each other with the weight of permanent commitment settling over them like snow. We're married, Lena said, testing the words. We're married, Rowan confirmed, wonder in his voice. You're my wife, and you're my husband, my partner, my equal. She moved into his arms, felt them close around her with possessive tenderness. How does it feel? Terrifying, perfect, like standing on a cliff edge knowing I'm about to jump, but trusting you'll be there to catch me. Always, Lena promised, for the rest of our lives, whatever that brings. I'm here. They made love again that night, slower this time, learning the difference between desire stolen in secret and intimacy claimed openly. Lena discovered that being Rowan's wife felt fundamentally different from being his ward or even his fiancée. There was a security in it, a belonging that came from choosing and being chosen without reservation or doubt. Afterward, lying tangled together with moonlight streaming through the windows, Rowan spoke into the darkness. I have something to tell you about the expansion plans for next year. Lena lifted her head to look at him. You're discussing business on our wedding night? I'm discussing partnership, because the expansion we're planning, requires your input and agreement, and I need you to know I'm not proceeding until I have it. She settled back against his chest, intrigued. I'm listening. The McGregor property you negotiated for us. It borders the Stevenson holdings to the north. Matthew Stevenson approached me last month about a potential partnership. He's got access to railroad contracts but lacks the grazing land to fulfill them. We've got the land but limited rail connections. Together we could expand operations significantly. Sounds promising. What's the catch? It would require substantial capital investment and me traveling regularly to negotiate with railroad executives back east. I'd be gone for weeks at a time, leaving you to manage Blackridge operations largely on your own. Rowan's arms tightened around her. I wanted to ask rather than assume, is that something you're willing to take on, managing the valley while I'm handling expansion elsewhere? Lena felt warmth flood through her chest. This was partnership, being consulted on decisions that would affect both their lives, having her capabilities recognized and trusted rather than assumed or controlled. I'm willing, she said. I'm more than willing. I've been managing the estate while you recovered these past months. I know I can handle it. But I appreciate you asking rather than just announcing your travel plans and expecting me to cope. Never again, Rowan promised. Every major decision we make together, even when it's inconvenient, even when one of us thinks we know best. We talk first, decide second. Then let's talk about it properly tomorrow, with ledgers and projections and realistic assessment of risks and opportunities. She tilted her head up to kiss him. Tonight, I just want to be your wife and let business wait. I can agree to that. The months that followed their wedding were a study in learning to build equal partnership from the ruins of hierarchy and control. It wasn't always easy. Rowan still had instincts toward protection that sometimes manifested as overreach. Lena still had habits of deferring to his judgment rather than trusting her own. They fought, not the silent, cold warfare of their estrangement, but loud, honest arguments where both of them said exactly what they meant and worked through disagreements until they reached genuine compromise. The first major conflict came when Rowan's railroad negotiations required a 3-week trip east. The night before his departure, he presented Lena with a detailed list of instructions for managing Blackridge in his absence. Everything from which ranch hands to assign to which tasks to how to handle disputes with neighboring properties. Lena read through the list with growing irritation. This is a manual for running things exactly as you would run them. Where's the space for my judgment, my decisions, my approach? I'm just trying to help. You're trying to control outcomes while pretending to delegate authority. She set down the papers firmly. Either you trust me to manage Blackridge, which means accepting that I might do things differently than you would, or you don't trust me, in which case you need to cancel your trip. You can't have it both ways. Rowan's jaw tightened. What if you make a mistake? What if something goes wrong because you didn't follow established protocols? Then I'll fix it. I'll learn from it. I'll deal with the consequences like an adult capable of managing her own errors. Lena moved closer, made him look at her. You took a bullet for me, Rowan. You've proven you'll literally die to protect me. But I need you to understand that the greatest protection you can give me now is trusting me to handle things on my own, even when it scares you. She watched him struggle with it, the fear and the trust warring visibly across his features. Finally, he picked up the instruction list and fed it into the fireplace, watching the papers curl and blacken. You're right, he said quietly. I'm sorry. Manage Blackridge however you think best. I trust your judgment. Thank you. When Rowan returned 3 weeks later, he found operations running smoothly but differently. Lena had reorganized the work schedules to be more efficient, had negotiated a new contract with the town merchants that saved money on supplies, had resolved a boundary dispute with a neighboring ranch through diplomacy, rather than the aggressive posturing Rowan typically employed. He studied the changes with an expression Lena couldn't quite read. Then he smiled, genuine, proud, without a trace of resentment. You're better at this than I am. Not better, different. She moved into his arms, relieved to have him home. We're a good team because we have different strengths. You're brilliant at big-picture strategy and expansion planning. I'm better at operational details and relationship management. Together, we're stronger than either of us alone. Partners, Rowan said, kissing her thoroughly. Equals, just like we promised. The Valley's perception of them shifted gradually over that first year of marriage. People saw Lena making independent decisions, saw Rowan supporting rather than controlling those decisions, saw them operate as genuine partners rather than master and subordinate. The whispers and judgment didn't disappear entirely. There would always be those who found their relationship too unconventional or their dynamic too threatening to traditional hierarchies. But increasingly, the Valley recognized them as formidable in their partnership. Other ranches started consulting Lena directly on business matters rather than going through Rowan. Women began asking her advice on negotiating their own roles within family operations. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, Blackridge Valley began to shift toward a more equitable understanding of what partnerships could look like. The turning point came during the Valley's annual assembly, where major landowners gathered to discuss water rights, grazing boundaries, and collective business strategies. Traditionally, these assemblies were male-only affairs. Wives and daughters stayed home while men made decisions affecting entire families and operations. Lena had always been excluded, first as Rowan's ward, then as his wife, the assumption being that he represented their shared interests. This year, she showed up anyway. The room fell silent when she walked in. 30 men staring at the woman who dared enter their domain without invitation or apology. Miss Ashford, Matthew Stevenson said carefully. He still called her that despite her marriage, an acknowledgement of her professional identity. I don't believe wives are typically included in these proceedings. I'm not here as Rowan Hale's wife, Lena said clearly, moving to take the empty seat beside her husband. I'm here as a 50% equity partner in Blackridge operations, which gives me the same standing as any other landowner in this valley. If you want to discuss matters affecting my business interests, I have every right to be present. She could feel Rowan's tension beside her, not from disapproval, but from readiness to defend her if the valley refused to accept her presence. She laid her hand on his arm gently, a silent message. Let me fight this battle myself. This is highly irregular, another rancher objected. We've never had women participate in valley assemblies. Then it's time you started. Lena met his eyes steadily. Half the successful operations in this valley are run by women, whether you acknowledge it or not. The difference is I'm doing it openly rather than hiding behind my husband's name. Now, are we going to waste time debating my right to be here, or can we proceed with actual business? The standoff lasted several tense seconds. Then Jacob Harrison, grown into his authority since his father's retirement, spoke up. Miss Ashford makes a valid point. She holds equity in one of the valley's largest operations. I see no reason to exclude her from discussions affecting that operation. One by one, other voices joined in agreement. Not all of them. Some ranchers walked out in protest, unwilling to participate in proceedings that included a woman. But enough stayed that the assembly continued, and Lena found herself participating in strategic discussions about water allocation and railroad contracts and collective bargaining with merchants. She contributed thoughtfully, demonstrated her knowledge of valley economics, made several suggestions that even the skeptics had to admit were sound. By the end of the day, she'd proven her right to be there through sheer competence rather than argument. Riding home afterward, Rowan was quiet for a long time. Finally, he said, "You were magnificent today." "I was terrified today. I just didn't let them see it." That's what courage is. He reached across the space between their horses to take her hand. "I'm proud of you, and grateful you're fighting these battles for both of us, changing this valley's understanding of what's possible." "It's exhausting," Lena admitted. "Having to prove myself constantly, justify my presence, demonstrate my capability over and over again. Sometimes I wonder if it's worth it." "It is. Not just for you, but for every woman who comes after you. You're creating precedent, opening doors that were locked for generations." Rowan squeezed her hand. "And you're not fighting alone. I'm here, supporting you however you need." "I know. That makes all the difference." Spring came to Black Ridge Valley with a rush of snowmelt and green growth, the land renewing itself after winter's hardship. Lena woke one morning to nausea and exhaustion, dismissed it as overwork, then finally acknowledged the truth when her monthly courses failed to arrive for the second time. She was pregnant. The realization hit her with complicated emotion, joy and fear and wonder all tangled together. She'd never really thought about motherhood, never planned for it amid everything else she was trying to accomplish. Now it was happening whether she was ready or not. She told Rowan that night, watching his face cycle through shock, elation, and immediate protective concern. "Are you all right? Should you be riding, working the way you have been?" He was already moving into planning mode, trying to figure out how to keep her safe through pregnancy and childbirth in harsh frontier territory. "I'm fine. Women have been having babies since the beginning of time. I'm not made of glass." But Lena felt her own fear bubbling up. What if I'm terrible at it? Motherhood? What if I can't balance running Black Ridge with raising a child? What if... Then we figure it out together, like everything else. Rowan pulled her into his arms. "You don't have to be perfect at it, Lena. You just have to try. And I'll be here trying alongside you. What if our child inherits your protective instincts and my stubborn independence? We'll raise the most impossible person in the territory. Then they'll fit right into this family." The pregnancy progressed through summer and into early autumn. Lena continued working despite growing fatigue and physical limitation, determined not to let approaching motherhood define her entire identity. The valley watched with interest, some disapproving of her continued activity, others impressed by her refusal to retreat into conventional feminine limitation. The baby came early on a cold October morning, arriving with dramatic speed that left the doctor barely time to reach Black Ridge Hall. Lena endured labor with gritted teeth and stubborn refusal to scream, squeezing Rowan's hand hard enough to leave bruises while Mrs. Brennan coached and encouraged. And then suddenly there was a child, a daughter, red-faced and furious at being thrust into the world, with a cry that could probably be heard in the next valley. "She's got opinions," the doctor said, wrapping the infant in blankets. "Strong lungs on this one." Rowan stared at the baby with absolute wonder, his face transformed by emotion Lena had never seen before. When the doctor placed their daughter in his arms, he looked at Lena with tears streaming unashamedly down his face. "We made this," he said, awed. "We made a whole person." "We did," Lena agreed, exhausted and exhilarated and overwhelmed. "What should we name her?" They'd discussed names for weeks, unable to agree on anything, but looking at their daughter's fierce little face, both of them spoke simultaneously. Hope. Hope Ashford Hale, carrying both their names, symbolizing the new beginning they'd fought so hard to create. The days following Hope's birth were exhausting and beautiful in equal measure. Lena discovered that motherhood was every bit as challenging as running Black Ridge operations, but differently so. No amount of business acumen prepared you for the terror of a helpless infant, depending entirely on you, the bone-deep exhaustion of interrupted sleep, the fierce protective love that overwhelmed every other emotion. Rowan proved himself an involved father, taking turns with nighttime feedings and diaper changes, learning to soothe Hope's cries with the same methodical determination he applied to everything else. Watching him with their daughter, this powerful man rendered gentle by a 7-pound infant, Lena fell in love with him all over again. "I was wrong," Rowan said one night, holding Hope while Lena tried to eat dinner with both hands for the first time in days. Back when I was so terrified of my feelings for you, I told myself loving you would be betraying your father's trust. But I think the opposite is true. Thomas wanted you to have a good life, a full life, with people who loved you and challenged you and helped you become who you were meant to be. We've built that together. He gestured to their daughter, their home, the life they'd created. This is what he wanted for you. I think so too, Lena said softly. And I think he'd be proud of you for learning to be better than you were, for growing past your mistakes instead of being defined by them. Hope grew quickly, hitting milestones with the same determination her parents brought to everything. By her first birthday, she was walking, barely, with the unsteady gait of someone still figuring out balance, and getting into everything with fearless curiosity. She's going to be trouble, Mrs. Van Brennan predicted, watching Hope attempt to climb a bookshelf for the dozenth time. Smart and stubborn and afraid of nothing, just like her parents. Poor Valley, Rowan said, but his voice was full of pride. As Hope grew, Lena navigated the balance between motherhood and business operations with the same determination she brought to everything else. Some days she succeeded brilliantly, managing estate operations while Hope played nearby. Other days she failed spectacularly, accomplishing nothing because Hope needed attention or illness or comfort. She learned to accept the imperfection, to let go of the idea that she could be flawless at everything simultaneously. Rowan helped, not by taking over, but by being genuinely present, sharing parenting responsibilities equally, never suggesting that child-rearing was primarily Lena's domain while he focused on business. Other Valley families began following their example. Fathers more involved with children, mothers more involved with operations, partnerships built on genuine equality rather than rigid role divisions. The change was slow, often resisted, but undeniable. 5 years after their wedding, Lena stood on the ridge overlooking Black Ridge Valley, with Rowan beside her and Hope between them, the child's small hand in each of theirs. "Tell me what you see," Rowan said to their daughter, the same question he'd once asked Lena during her education. Hope surveyed the landscape with serious concentration. At 5 years old, she was already absorbing the business of ranching, understanding land and livestock with the same intuitive grasp her parents shared. "I see home," Hope said finally. "I see where Mama and Papa work. I see the place where our family lives." "What else?" Lena prompted. Hope thought harder. "I see. Possibility? Is that a thing I can see?" Lena and Rowan exchanged glances over their daughter's head, both remembering the conversations they'd had on this same ridge, the futures they'd imagined, the mistakes they'd made and overcome. "Yes," Lena said, kneeling to meet Hope's eyes. "Possibility is absolutely something you can see. It's one of the most important things to see." "What's it look like?" "Like whatever you choose to make it." That's the gift your papa and I want to give you, the freedom to choose your own path, build your own life. Become whoever you want to be rather than whoever the Valley expects. "Even if I don't want to run a ranch?" "Even then," Rowan confirmed, ruffling her hair. "You could be a doctor, a lawyer, a teacher, an explorer. You could leave the Valley entirely or stay and transform it. The choice is yours." Hope nodded seriously, processing this information. Then she asked, "Can I go play now?" They laughed and released her hands, watching her run off to investigate interesting rocks and prairie dog burrows. Free, unafraid, certain of her own worth and place in the world. "We did that," Lena said quietly. "We gave her security and freedom together, the thing we had to fight so hard to find for ourselves." "Best thing we've ever built," Rowan agreed, pulling her close. "Better than the Valley consolidation, better than the business expansion. We built a person who knows she's loved and valued and free to choose her own destiny." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching their daughter explore, the valley spreading around them in all its harsh beauty. This land had tested them, broken them, forced them to rebuild themselves better and stronger. It had been their prison and their sanctuary, their burden and their home. Now it was Hope's inheritance. Not just the physical property, but the legacy of two people who'd loved each other badly and then learned to love each other well, who'd made terrible mistakes and then done the hard work of making amends, who'd fought against the limitations their world tried to impose and won the right to define their own terms. "Do you ever regret it?" Lena asked suddenly. "The years we lost fighting each other instead of being together?" Rowan considered the question seriously. I regret the pain we caused each other. I regret my silence and control and fear. But I don't regret the journey that brought us here, because I don't think we could have built what we have now without learning those hard lessons first. We had to break the old pattern completely before we could create something new. So you're saying our mistakes were necessary? I'm saying our mistakes taught us what we needed to learn. That's not the same as being necessary, but it's something. He turned her to face him, his hands gentle on her shoulders. And I'm saying that every day I wake up married to you, partnering with you, raising our daughter with you, that's a gift I'll never take for granted because I know how close I came to losing it completely. Lena stretched up to kiss him, tasting possibility and promise and the particular sweetness of love hard-won through struggle and surrender. I love you, Rowan Hale, even when you're impossible, even when we're fighting, even when everything's difficult. I love you. I love you, Lena Hale, for the rest of our lives, however long that is, whatever comes. I love you. Hope called to them from the valley floor. She'd found something fascinating, something she wanted to share. They walked down together to see what their daughter had discovered. Hands linked, future spreading before them like open territory waiting to be claimed. Behind them, Blackridge Hall stood solid against the mountains, a home built on second chances and hard truths. Ahead lay whatever adventures tomorrow brought, challenges and joys, and all the messy, complicated beauty of building a life together. They were ready for it. Both of them, equal partners, facing the future side by side. The valley had broken them once. They'd rebuilt themselves stronger, fiercer, more honest than before. And in doing so, they'd proven the most important truth of all, that love could survive what silence destroys, that partnership could flourish where control had failed, and that the hardest battles worth fighting were the ones you fought for each other. Not against the world, but for the right to define your own place in it. Together, they'd won that right. Together, they'd keep fighting to protect it. Together, they'd teach their daughter to do the same. And that legacy of courage and honesty and fierce, freely chosen love would outlast them both, transforming Blackridge Valley one stubborn, impossible choice at a time.